Standing atop a grassy ridge, a breeze sweeps over a vast valley as a young man with a shovel and his loyal companions gaze out over the land. The white banner fluttering high in the wind proudly displays a unique emblem surrounded by detailed mythical creatures. Holding his shovel with pride alongside his stoic knight and adorable spirit beasts, he announces his original identity as Suho Kim. Right on cue, the tiny elemental creatures let out cheerful, energetic squeaks of agreement. However, in this fantasy realm, he is no longer an ordinary guy. He is now known as Lloyd Frontera. With a confident smirk, Lloyd twirls his trusted shovel overhead, ready to begin his grand story. He slams the heavy shovel deep into the dirt with a powerful thud. Instantly, a glowing blue system grid erupts from the ground right beneath his feet. The sparkling blue grid rapidly expands across the endless green countryside, mapping out the entire landscape. Bright holographic blueprints rise into the sky, outlining massive modern skyscrapers. This is the tale of how a mere civil engineering student completely revolutionizes and turns an entire world upside down. Looking out at the vast digital blueprint covering the horizon, Lloyd marvels at the massive construction plans ahead. Turning to his silver-haired knight, Lloyd calls out to Javier, who calmly responds to his master. Unable to contain his absolute joy, Lloyd throws his head back and shouts that every piece of land means pure profit. Watching his master cackle maniacally at the open grass, Javier dryly asks if Lloyd has finally lost his sanity. To understand how all this madness began, we have to rewind back to a few years ago. It all started when a system alert suddenly popped up, announcing he was chosen for a random wish granted by the Absolute. The system screen cheerfully congratulated him with a playful round of applause. Waking up face down in the dirt with drool on his mouth, Suho stared at the glowing blue window in complete shock. A new notification informed him that he was now a character inside the story Knight of Blood and Iron. Lying on the floor, he realized this was the exact fantasy web novel he had been reading the night before. The system then popped digital party poppers, wishing him the best of luck on his new journey. Still completely bewildered, Suho questioned what kind of absurd wish this was when he hadn't even had a drop of alcohol. Panicking on the ground, it finally dawned on him that he had transmigrated into a different world just like in web novels. Realizing the full reality of his situation, he paused to think about what this meant for his future. Lying flat on his face in the middle of a dirt road, he yelled out in frustration, questioning why on earth he had woken up in such a miserable state. He pushed himself up onto his knees, shivering uncontrollably as the freezing night air cut right through his light clothing. Hugging his arms tightly to stay warm, he suddenly felt something terribly wrong with his face and panicked upon feeling his twisted lips. A bright red system notification rang out, mockingly informing him that his jaw had popped out of alignment just from sleeping face down on the cold ground. Furious at the system's relentless mocking, he slapped the floating screen away, yelling that he was already well aware of his own injury. Rubbing his dislocated jaw, he tried to piece together which novel character he had transmigrated into, specifically, who in the Night of Blood and Iron was pitiful enough to pass out alone on a dirt path. Before he could finish his thought, a mysterious voice suddenly called out from behind, addressing him as Master Lloyd. He spun around to find a towering figure clad in a sleek blue coat stepping out of the darkness, stating that he had been searching everywhere for him. As the stranger stepped closer under the moonlight, the ornate hilt of a sword resting at his waist glistened quietly. The moonlight illuminated the sharp side profile of a remarkably handsome young man with silver blue hair and a cold, disciplined aura. Standing tall in noble attire, the man instructed him to return to the manor, revealing himself as Javier Azrahan, the protagonist of the web novel. Staring in disbelief, he recognized Javier's iconic appearance, but then froze in sheer horror as he realized Javier had just called him Lloyd. In the original novel, Javier was a legendary swordsman whose deadly blue aura made him an unstoppable force on the battlefield. However, at this point in the story, Javier was merely a loyal house knight serving the lord of the remote Frontera territory, and the notorious eldest son of Baron Frontera, infamous for his drunken antics and setting up his family's ruin, was none other than— He screamed in absolute horror as the terrible truth hit him. He had transmigrated into Lloyd Frontera, the useless trash villain of the story. The two men stood in awkward silence on the dark road, with Javier staring completely unbothered at Lloyd's dramatic meltdown. Breaking the quiet, Javier calmly pointed out that while he had called him by his name, he had never explicitly called him a hooligan. With a subtle, mocking smirk, Javier added that at least Lloyd possessed some self-awareness, while a system prompt giggled at Javier's rare good mood. Shortly after, the two made their way back to the quiet Frontera manor resting under the night sky. Inside, Javier crouched before the crackling fireplace and poked the flames, asking if Lloyd truly had no memory of how he ended up on the road. As Lloyd huddled on his bed wrapped in a blanket, Javier dryly recounted how Lloyd had spent the afternoon getting drunk, trashing a local pub and passing out on his walk home. Javier explained that the Baron had sent him out of concern, bluntly adding that even a trash son dying on the roadside with a popped jaw would sadden his father. Shivering violently from the chill, Lloyd touched the icy wooden floorboards and bitterly wished for a modern Korean underfloor heating system. Preparing to leave, Javier cold-heartedly announced he would report the full incident to the Baron tomorrow, shutting down Lloyd's desperate objections without hesitation. Just as Javier turns to leave, Lloyd calls out to stop him, prompting the knight to pause at the door with a polite question. Huddled tightly under his blanket, Lloyd directly asks Javier to confirm whether their family is buried under heavy debt. Surprised by the unexpected inquiry, Javier remarks on how strange it is for Lloyd to suddenly show concern over financial matters. Without offering any comfort, Javier clicks the door shut, leaving Lloyd alone in his freezing room to face the harsh reality. Sitting in the dark, Lloyd reflects on the fact that he already knows every detail of this world's tragic storyline. He remembers reading the final chapter of the web novel in his tiny Korean room, well aware of the gruesome fate awaiting his character. In the novel, the Baron and Baroness fall victim to a ruthless scammer, losing all their property before committing suicide. Left penniless after his parents' tragedy, Lloyd turns into a pathetic beggar, spending his days drinking himself into oblivion. Eventually, his extreme alcoholism takes its toll, causing him to cough up blood and die a miserable death in a tavern. Furious at his predestined tragic end, Lloyd throws off his blanket and rages about reincarnating into such a hopeless, noble life. He curses the system prompt for fulfilling his random wish, wondering what foolish desire landed him in the body of a doomed character. The next morning dawns brightly over the sprawling green landscape of the estate, contrasting with the trouble brewing inside. Inside the grand estate building, Lloyd prepares himself to confront the aftermath of his original body's wild actions. His mother, Lloyd Frontera, stands alongside Javier and gently asks Lloyd if he really trashed the local pub the night before. Caught off guard, Lloyd reflexively lies, claiming he spent his entire evening quietly reading a book in his room. Deeply saddened by his ongoing misbehavior, his mother tearfully implores him to go to the tavern and offer a sincere apology. Realizing he must clean up the original owner's mess to survive, Lloyd scratches his head and reluctantly agrees to go make amends. Both Javier and Marbella stand completely frozen in shock, while a system message pops up highlighting their immense confusion. Shortly after, the scene shifts to the peaceful village streets, where Lloyd makes his way toward the tavern. Along the road, a local worker grunts while carefully stacking heavy bundles of straw onto his wooden cart. Hearing footsteps nearby, the villager glances up to see who is approaching down the quiet street. To his utter horror, he spots the notorious troublemaker Lloyd walking right toward him accompanied by Javier. Panicking at the sight of the young master, the worker frantically scrambles behind his cart and barrels to hide. Lloyd can only stare in awkward silence as the man cowers, while Javier watches with his usual stoic expression. As Lloyd continues walking down the alley, villagers flee and scatter in all directions, terrified to be anywhere near him. Lloyd stands there completely lost for words, sweating nervously as he realizes just how deep the villagers' hatred for him runs. Up above, a curious young boy leans out of an upper-story window to see what all the fuss is about. Before the child can get a good look, his frantic father yanks him away, yelling at him not to make eye contact with Lloyd. With a loud slam, the wooden shutters are shut tight, closing off the house in complete fear. As if he needed any further proof, a system message pops up with a ding, bluntly informing him that the villagers absolutely detest him. Trying to move past the awkwardness, Lloyd turns to Javier and asks why he's following him, only for the knight to explain he was ordered by the Baron to prevent yesterday's disaster from recurring. Thinking he got a personal bodyguard, Lloyd is quickly shut down when Javier clarifies he's actually escorting him to protect the townsfolk from Lloyd himself. Realizing his terrible reputation could literally leave him starving if he ever ends up on the streets, Lloyd decides his top priority must be cleaning up his trashy image. However, if he can somehow manage to settle his family's massive debt before everything falls apart, he could live peacefully as the Baron's heir, soaking in a sweet and comfortable life all the way into old age. Hoping for a shortcut, he wonders if he has any cheat skills, and to his surprise, a blue system window chimes into existence. However, inspecting his status panel reveals nothing but useless, trashy passives like human scum and rowdy drunkard that only make people despise him. Overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of his pathetic abilities, Lloyd begins flailing his arms around in public like a madman. Seeing him march off in the wrong direction, Javier calls out to ask where on earth he thinks he's going. Javier points out that the pub is right behind them, dryly asking if his promised apology was a lie and causing Lloyd to frantically scramble for an excuse. Javier glares at him with cold, suspicious eyes, quietly scrutinizing every single bizarre move his young master makes. Unnerved by the intense stare, Lloyd stammers nervously, wondering why the silver-haired knight is looking at him like that. Dismissing his doubts for the moment, Javier closes his eyes and tells Lloyd they should head inside. Lloyd politely pushes open the creaky wooden door and calls out a friendly greeting, while Javier silently follows behind. Observing Lloyd's unusually polite behavior, Javier can't help but feel that his master has become a completely different person overnight. Inside, the pub is a total disaster area, filled with smashed tables and splintered chairs from last night's chaos. Even the wall decorations bear the marks of destruction, showing just how violent the previous rampage had been. Stepping inside, Lloyd immediately drops into a deep bow, loudly begging for forgiveness and taking full responsibility for the wreckage. Instead of accepting the apology, the bald pub owner trembles in utter terror, taking a defensive stance as the system notes he's on extreme high alert. The terrified owner frantically begs him to stop, leaving Lloyd to realize that his sudden politeness is actually scaring the poor man even more. Realizing his polite gesture failed, Lloyd tries giving a half-hearted apology with a smug slouch, but the system immediately calls him out for being disingenuous, exasperating him further. The terrified pub owner cowers in fear, sweating nervously as he desperately stammers that Lloyd doesn't need to apologize at all. Lloyd can only stare back in awkward silence, completely at a loss for how to handle the situation. Later, as they walk along a dirt path crossing a stone bridge, Lloyd complains that the pub owner still seemed miserable despite receiving an apology, though Javier calmly points out that it was only natural. Javier reminds him that all the furniture and decorations Lloyd trashed the day before were bought with the owner's hard-earned savings, meaning he won't be truly satisfied until he receives proper financial compensation. Lloyd inwardly fumes at the thought, stressing over how impossible it is to win over the villagers when his estate is already drowning in massive debt. He knows that unless they find a way to clear their mountain of debt, their terrible reputation will never improve, but finding a solution seems nearly impossible. Lloyd remembers that the pub owner's mother fell ill from the harsh winter cold, prompting Javier to add that dealing with a sick parent alongside Lloyd's reckless behavior must make life unbearable for the man. Recalling how drafty the tavern was, Lloyd realizes that a single fireplace could never properly heat an entire building during the freezing winter months. As his boots crunch along the trail, he considers how vulnerable the elderly are to severe cold, unless, of course, they had a traditional Korean ondol underfloor heating system. Suddenly, Lloyd freezes right in his tracks as a sudden realization strikes him. His eyes widen in shock as the missing piece of the puzzle suddenly falls into place. A metaphorical light bulb appears right in the center of his mind. Sparks of inspiration begin to flicker within the filament as the idea ignites. With absolute conviction, Lloyd declares to himself that he has finally figured out a brilliant solution. Electricity crackles violently through the light bulb as his genius plan surges into full force. A powerful jolt of realization snaps through his mind like a bolt of lightning. The idea fully erupts with brilliant energy, illuminating the exact path he needs to take. Green holographic lines immediately shoot across his mental field, constructing complex architectural grid lines. A full three-dimensional blueprint of a heating system rapidly materializes in his vision. Staring at the detailed ondol schematic projected before him, Lloyd realizes that this fantasy world completely lacks underfloor heating. He calculates the immense potential if he introduces this revolutionary engineering concept to this medieval realm. He knows with absolute certainty that an efficient heating system like ondol would sell like hotcakes and generate massive revenue. The trashy original Lloyd Frontera was just a brainless thug who could only cause destruction and terrorize innocent villagers like the pub owner. But as Suho Kim, a brilliant civil engineering student inside Lloyd's body, he possesses the technical expertise to reshape this world and solve all their problems. Suho recalls his past life where he majored in civil engineering and built an entire house by himself during his time as a military engineer. He spent endless days and nights performing grueling labor, carrying massive stacks of bricks up construction site stairs. Realizing his engineering background is the ultimate solution, Lloyd clenches his fist with confidence, ready to settle all of the estate's debts. He immediately turns around and marches back toward the village, leaving Javier confused and questioning why they are returning. With an eager grin, Lloyd shouts back that he is heading back to secure his very first real construction project. As he walks, a sudden chime rings out as a blue system notification appears, announcing that his true journey has finally begun. The system activates a new feature called Relationship Points, allowing him to earn points by improving his bonds with key characters. A status screen pops up in front of him, showing that his current relationship point balance starts at 0. Curious about the new interface, Lloyd leans in closely to examine the translucent blue screens floating before him. He strokes his chin thoughtfully, wondering if these points function like experience points, while noting the lack of instructions on how to use them. Analyzing the system text, he ponders what it really takes to boost his relationship standing with key figures. Looking over at Javier, Lloyd notices a glowing system icon buzzing directly above the knight's head. To his shock, a notification reveals that Javier's current approval rating of him stands at an abysmal -30. Determined to raise his score, Lloyd turns toward Javier with a forced, friendly grin to strike up a conversation. Putting on a handsome, dazzling pose, Lloyd tries to flatter the knight by complimenting his good looks. Javier dryly responds that he already knows he is handsome, which immediately drops his approval rating even lower to -31. Realizing that shameless flattery will only backfire, Lloyd quickly backs off and decides to set the relationship grind aside for later. Shortly after, the duo arrives outside the local village pub to begin their negotiations. Inside, Lloyd lays out a blank contract on the table, explaining to the pub owner that they are entering an agreement as builder and buyer. He proposes to rebuild the destroyed tavern free of charge to write off all the property damages he caused, urging the owner to sign. However, the mustached pub owner glares back with deep suspicion, refusing to easily trust the estate's infamous deadbeat. Noticing a system prompt reveal the owner's stone wall heart defense skill, Lloyd laments how ruined his past reputation truly is. Unwilling to let his grand blueprint fail before it even starts, Lloyd realizes he needs a new strategy. He decides that if gentle persuasion fails, he will simply lean into the original Lloyd's terrifying hooligan persona. Twisting his face into a terrifyingly villainous scowl, Lloyd leans across the table to intimidate the pub owner into accepting the deal. The intimidating tactic works like a charm as the terrified pub owner furiously scribbles his signature on the contract, though Javier internally judges Lloyd as absolute garbage. Triumphantly stashing the signed document into his coat, Lloyd smirks deviously after securing his very first construction order. He reassures the traumatized owner with a sinister laugh, leaving Javier standing in utter, silent disbelief behind him. Arriving at the build site with a shovel in hand, Lloyd prepares to break ground, figuring precise measurements aren't strictly necessary for a cozy building. Before he can begin work, Javier calls out to get his attention. The knight confronts him directly, accusing Lloyd of coercing the pub owner and questioning if this is just another ploy to cause trouble. Lloyd glances back over his shoulder with a calm and surprisingly composed expression. Calling out Javier's persistent cynicism, Lloyd asks if he has ever heard of the psychological concept of cognitive distortion. He passionately lectures the knight on how negative assumptions from past events distort one's perception of current actions. Unmoved by the speech, Javier calmly retorts that his skepticism is based on logical experience and statistical facts. Lloyd quickly counters by asking if experience and statistics aren't just artifacts of the past anyway. Stunned into silence, Javier internally marvels at how surprisingly articulate and silver-tongued the young master has become. Maintaining his focus, Lloyd boldly vows that he will make his clients smile. Driving his shovel firmly into the soil, he promises that the pub owner and his mother will be overjoyed with the result. As he pushes deeper into the dirt, he continues detailing his true motives. With a wild, greedy grin, he slings a shovel of earth aside, revealing that customer satisfaction is simply the foundation for his future fortune. He plunges into manual labor, rhythmically scooping, moving, and tamping down dirt while Javier quietly watches. Using timber brought from his family mansion, Lloyd tirelessly hammers together a traditional wooden house frame. After filling in the walls with river clay, the house frame is finished, and an utterly spent Lloyd collapses straight onto the ground. Gasping heavily on the dirt, Lloyd internally laments how terribly weak and unconditioned his new body is. When Javier dryly comments that the building went up in just 3 panel cuts, a furious Lloyd screams back that it actually took a full week. Staring at the real structure, Javier ponders where Lloyd learned construction and questions if the infamous hooligan really plans on keeping his promise. Trembling from severe muscle soreness, Lloyd forces his aching body back onto its feet to keep working. His arms wobble uncontrollably as he grips an axe, struggling to maintain his balance over the chopping block. Straining through gritted teeth, He painfully lifts the heavy blade high above his head to chop more timber. Unable to handle the heavy weight, Lloyd staggers backward in sheer panic as he completely loses his balance. Before he can tumble over, a firm pair of hands suddenly grabs hold of the axe handle midair. It is Javier, stepping in just in time to steady both the heavy weapon and Lloyd's trembling frame. Without breaking a sweat, Javier takes full control of the axe, taking it directly out of Lloyd's hands. Javier calmly asks what needs to be done, prompting Lloyd to outline the exact measurements for the wooden pieces he requires. Without hesitation, Javier casually tosses a whole set of heavy timber logs straight up into the air. Locking his eyes on the target, Javier pulls back the axe and swings it with terrifying speed and precision. In a dazzling display of mastery, he slices through the airborne logs, carving them into perfectly uniform wooden slates before they even hit the ground. A smooth pile of neatly cut wooden boards clatters onto the dirt floor. Lloyd stands frozen with his eyes wide and mouth wide open, completely blown away by the unbelievable feat. Snapping back to his senses, he enthusiastically flashes Javier a big thumbs up in absolute awe. As Javier stands proudly with aura glowing around his axe, Lloyd marvels at how a future master swordsman makes modern tools feel completely obsolete. Placing a friendly hand on Javier's shoulder, Lloyd calls his name with a sneaky grin. He offers him a shovel, cheeky enough to ask if Javier would mind helping him with the heavy digging as well. Javier fumes with annoyance, deeply regretting ever stepping in after being rewarded for his help with even more manual labor. Leaning in close, Lloyd smoothly plays on Javier's suspicion, pointing out that if he wants to uncover his true intentions, speeding up the work is the fastest way. With a wickedly confident smirk, Lloyd declares that the only way to get answers quickly is by doing the heavy lifting together. Javier breaks into a sweat, completely cornered by Lloyd's surprisingly airtight logic. He internally admits that while Lloyd has transformed into a completely different person lately, his shady past still makes him impossible to fully trust. Deciding that seeing the project through is his only choice, Javier jumps into the trench and begins shoveling earth alongside Lloyd. Sweat pours down Javier's face as he applies his monstrous physical talent to digging at incredible speeds. Not wanting to be outdone, Lloyd strains every muscle in his body, furiously digging and flinging earth everywhere. The shovel repeatedly bites into the dirt, flinging massive scoops of earth out of the trench. Showing off his unexpected finesse, Lloyd stylishly twirls his tool in a show of pure determination. He slams the spade deep into the hard ground, driving the excavation forward with everything he's got. In no time at all, the structural build of the cozy new cottage is finally wrapping up. Thrusting his fist into the sky with a triumphant shout, Lloyd officially declares that construction is complete. Pointing out the uniquely carved sign on the wall, Javier asks about the strange emblem, which Lloyd proudly explains is his official brand logo. Turning toward his loyal knight with a smug grin, Lloyd invites Javier inside to see the results. He sarcastically jokes about what kind of scheme he's managed to pull off on the unsuspecting pub owner. Javier can only glare back silently, thoroughly unimpressed by Lloyd's shady choice of words. Meanwhile, a chill autumn breeze sweeps through the surrounding forest outside. Inside the new structure, a warm fire crackles merrily away within the stone hearth. The chimney vents out thick white smoke as the traditional heating system begins working its magic beneath the structure. Inside, the pub owner's elderly mother collapses onto the floor in sheer bliss as radiant heat steams right up through the floorboards. Sweat gently glistening on her face, she groans with absolute relief as the cozy warmth instantly soothes her aching, stiff joints. Stunned by the miracle, the pub owner touches the bare floor, amazed at how comfortable and warm it feels without any visible fire inside. Watching their reaction, Lloyd smiles knowingly, well aware of how revolutionary modern Korean ondal floor heating must seem to people in this fantasy world. To the locals, the unbelievable warmth radiating directly beneath them feels nothing short of high-tier magic. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the pub owner tearfully thanks Lloyd for bringing a bright, genuine smile back to his ailing mother's face. Watching the heartfelt reunion, Javier realizes that Lloyd delivered on his promise to make the family happy, precisely down to the word. Javier ponders how much the young master has changed, going from an insolent noble to someone who works tirelessly for commoners. He wonders if Lloyd genuinely built this out of pure kindness, though his instinct tells him the old selfish Lloyd would never act without an ulterior motive. Yet despite his suspicions, the heartwarming outcome right before his eyes is undeniable. Seeing the mother and son sharing a moment of pure, radiant happiness fills the room with genuine warmth. Softening his sharp demeanor, a gentle smile touches Javier's lips as he acknowledges the good Lloyd has brought. Immediately, a blue system notification pops up, announcing that Javier's approval rating has just increased by 2 points, bringing his total approval rating up from rock bottom to a slightly less disastrous -29. Additionally, Lloyd earns 36 RP points for making slight progress in his relationship with a key story character. Glancing at the flipped system screen, Lloyd smirks deviously, thoroughly satisfied that his true scheme worked like a charm. Lloyd smugly assumes Javier is impressed and thinking he isn't total trash after all, but Javier bluntly shuts him down, insisting he still considers him garbage. Brushing off Javier's harsh response, Lloyd smiles, acknowledging that taking a financial loss on timber was worth it just to break ground. He reveals his grand strategy. The small heated hut was never meant for profit, but as a model house to showcase the Andal system to the public. A few days later, his marketing tactic pays off as a massive line of local villagers forms right outside the model house. The first villager steps out completely drenched in sweat, amazed by the sweltering heat inside and admitting he felt like he was melting. Lloyd seizes the opportunity, aggressively tapping his desk as he asks the man if he wants that exact warmth in his own home. He holds up blueprints pitching 2 options, a full annex build or remodeling their existing home, offering a 10% discount if they order both. The customer hesitates, prompting a system notification that the villagers still lack trust in Lloyd despite his enthusiastic sales pitch. As Lloyd dramatically whines about practically giving his work away, heavy footsteps suddenly approach from behind. Hearing his name called out sternly, Lloyd nervously turns around to see who interrupted his sales attempt. It is his father, Lloyd Frontera, standing nearby with a stern look, demanding to know what his son is up to. Seeing a system alert reveal an approval rating of -20 with his father, Lloyd breaks out into a nervous sweat. Later that evening, the scene shifts to the estate's grand dining hall as dinner is served. Lloyd and his father sit at opposite ends of a ridiculously long table, dining in complete, tense silence. Lloyd glares nervously across the massive gap, trying to gauge how angry his father actually is. He worries inwardly, fearing that after avoiding his father for so long, his entire construction project might get shut down. Breaking the silence, Arcos cuts his meat and sternly demands to hear an explanation from his son. Glaring across the table, his father asks what kind of trouble or scheme Lloyd is cooking up this time. Lloyd casually munches on a sausage and bluntly explains in his rude tone that he simply built an Andal room because the pub owner paid for it. Arcos mentions hearing that other villagers are placing orders too, to which Lloyd casually replies while chewing that his father already knows the story. Closing his eyes sternly, Arcos warns Lloyd that the commoners are under their care, so he will not tolerate him lying to or tricking them. Lloyd swallows his food and reassures him he had no such intentions, though he internally sighs that everyone always assumes the worst of him. Sensing the lecture is over, Lloyd quickly bows to excuse himself, internally screaming at himself to run away as fast as possible. But before he can make his escape, his father stops him, asking if he's doing all of this because of their family's financial crisis. Turning back with a solemn expression, Arcos tells Lloyd that he will fix the estate's troubles himself and orders his son not to get involved. Lloyd remains silent, looking back at his father as heavy emotions linger in the air. Deep down, he realizes that he has heard those comforting words somewhere before. A flashback reveals his father in his past life, reassuring young Suho to ignore their debts and focus solely on his studies. Back then, he truly believed that everything would somehow turn out okay on its own. Knowing how that turned out, Lloyd silently calls out the lie, well aware that their situation is anything but okay. He swears to himself that he will never let poverty and money ruin his life ever again. Turning back to walk away, Lloyd tells his father not to give up, promising that he won't give up either. He deeply regrets never having the courage to say those exact words to his real father in his past life. Shifting back to business, Lloyd mentally tallies his active construction orders and incoming payments. His train of thought is interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. 2 wealthy men strut past him, identified as the loan sharks Meatloaf and Shiloh. Noticing that they completely ignore him despite being the Lord's son, Lloyd realizes how little respect they hold for his family. Looking back at them, he immediately recognizes who they are and why they have arrived. Beyond the closed office doors, an intense argument breaks out inside the Baron's study. Meatloaf and Shiloh aggressively slam their hands on the desk, demanding payment and pointing out that the deadline expired 5 days ago. Baron Arcos sits helplessly as the lenders threaten to take drastic measures if he continues to stall. Shiloh mocks the silent Baron and demands he sell off estate property, while Lloyd quietly peeks through the opening door. Instead of feeling worried, Lloyd smiles softly from behind the door, realizing their arrival is actually ideal. A sly, scheming grin spreads across his face as he realizes the debt collectors arrived at the exact right moment. Recalling events from earlier, Lloyd had wondered how best to spend the relationship points he earned from Javier. The system interface had popped up to explain that his accumulated points could be invested in acquiring new abilities. After Lloyd accidentally insulted the system window, he was forced to quickly apologize before it closed itself. Once activated, a bright blue magic circle pulsed onto the floor directly under his feet. The system began scanning his soul, detecting engineering skills like soil mechanics, hydraulics, and structural mechanics. It continued absorbing his modern expertise, converting his knowledge of water networks and structural design into official system skills. The system threw a cheeky insult claiming he knew more than he looked, causing an outraged Lloyd to yell back that he was a top-tier scholarship student. A new screen then appeared, unlocking 2 skills based on his real-world knowledge: Basic Surveying for 15 points and Basic Design for 20. Looking at the brief descriptions, Lloyd was skeptical about how useful these basic skills would actually be. Since he had 36 relation points stored up, he decided to just tap the screen and unlock them both immediately. The moment Basic Surveying activated, bright green light exploded from his eyes, making him scream in sheer shock. The overwhelming surge of visual data sent him bursting out his bedroom window in a wild frenzy. To his amazement, a glowing blue grid projected across the landscape, allowing him to measure land topography with his naked eyes without any equipment. Next, he tested Basic Design, easily drawing 3D green architectural blueprints in midair using just his fingertips. Although planning would be a breeze now, Lloyd sat on his bed contemplating whether Javier alone could handle all the heavy physical labor. He sighed, wishing he could somehow summon modern construction vehicles like excavators using his engineering background. To his shock, the system chimed in and revealed that a summoning system was actually an available option. Startled by the unexpected announcement, Lloyd leaned forward as a new system interface beeped into existence. The screen displayed a flashy ad for a random summon game, promising loyal partners with unique skills in exchange for relation points. Lloyd squinted suspiciously at the display, recognizing the familiar format of a predatory mobile game ad. Inspecting the start button, he discovered that a single spin of the gacha machine cost 50 relation points. He scoffed in frustration, remembering he was left with just a single relation point after buying his earlier skills. However, the thought of what a summon could be continued to echo in his mind. He envisioned terrifying monsters and mighty dragons being summoned directly onto the battlefield. Realizing magical beasts like unicorns or behemoths could act as living heavy machinery, he became obsessed with the idea. His eyes gleamed with intense focus as he realized he urgently needed to collect more relation points. To gather those points, his primary objective was clear. He had to make key characters like him. Meanwhile, in another room, a heavy hand slammed aggressively onto a desk, calling out Baron Frontera. A rotund, greedy loan shark confronted the stressed Baron, offering a sinister alternative to settling his unpaid debts. With a vile smirk, the creditor wickedly suggested selling the Baroness and her ladies to pay off the family's massive debt. Furious at the despicable insult toward his loved ones, Baron Frontera stood up and yelled back in absolute horror. But before the situation can escalate, a cool voice interrupts, pointing out that being a lender is no excuse for lacking basic manners. Suddenly, Lloyd appears right beside the greasy creditor, casually slinging an arm around his shoulder while holding a heavy sack. Startled out of his skin, the chubby loan shark leaps back in alarm and angrily shouts to know who he is. As the Baron stammers his son's name, the creditor snorts, mocking Lloyd's notorious reputation and asking why he's rudely barging into their business. Before the scammer can even finish warning him, Lloyd nonchalantly cuts him off and demands to see an official warrant. The unexpected demand leaves both the creditor and his mustache-twirling associate blinking in total bewilderment. With an icy look, Lloyd smoothly recites Article 3, Clause 6 of the Royal Nobility Act regarding a noble's right to protect their property. He sternly highlights the key detail. Entering a noble residence without an official warrant is legally classified as trespassing. Sweating profusely, the creditor yells back in outrage, claiming he has never heard of such a ridiculous law in his life. Lloyd just gives him a cheeky look, playfully suggesting they find out the truth together right now. Turning his head toward the entrance, Lloyd loudly calls out for his loyal silver-haired knight. Right on cue, a firm footstep echoes into the room as Javier answers his master's call. Standing at the doorway, Javier looks on with an icy gaze, his hand already resting on his sword hilt. With a downright demonic smirk, Lloyd gives a cold order to cut off the trespasser's arm. As Javier strides forward, the horrified loan sharks scramble backward in a panic, screaming that they will sue. Lloyd simply grins at their desperate threats, calmly remarking that they should indeed take it to court, while Javier unsheathes his gleaming blade with a sharp ring, ready to let a judge decide who is in the right. Faced with the lethal steel of an elite knight, both scammers go dead pale with shock and absolute terror. Realizing their lives are on the line, the fraudsters bolt for the exit, screaming desperate threats as they run for cover. The heavy wooden door slams shut behind the fleeing crooks, bringing an abrupt end to the chaos. Waving his hand dismissively, Lloyd clicks his tongue at how ridiculously pathetic the loan sharks were. Still trembling from the sudden turn of events, the bewildered Baron stammers out the names of his son and knight. Slamming his hands onto the desk, the exhausted father angrily demands to know what Lloyd was thinking, worrying they can't stave off the debt. In response, Lloyd casually drops the giant, heavy sack of gold coins directly onto the desk with a loud clank. With a calm smile, Lloyd explains that this heavy bag of coin should be more than enough to cover a massive chunk of this month's interest. The Baron gasps in shock, terrified that Lloyd might be extorting gold directly from his own vulnerable townspeople. Javier calmly steps forward, telling his lord not to fear. The loyal knight firmly guarantees that he will personally ensure Lloyd fulfills every construction order promised to the people. Observing Javier's unwavering expression, the Baron's anxiety clears as he realizes he can trust the knight completely. With the situation under control, Javier politely takes his leave while Lloyd quietly follows him out. As their footsteps echo down the corridor, Javier turns to interrogate Lloyd about his sudden legal knowledge. Javier questions how an uneducated troublemaker knew such an obscure law, making an annoyed Lloyd yell that he simply picked it up somewhere. In reality, Lloyd secretly remembers learning that exact law directly from reading about Javier's actions in the original web novel. He recalls how in the story, after the tragic suicide of the Baron and Baroness, Javier stood alone in the pouring rain. Ruthless loan sharks arrived at the cemetery intending to dig up the bodies and sell them off to recover their money. Before executing them, Javier cited Article 3, Clause 6 of the Nobility Act, authorizing nobles to protect their interests as vassals of the king. With a single, blinding slash of his blade, Javier decapitated the greedy criminals on the spot. Because of that precise legal justification, Javier was eventually found completely not guilty before a judge. Back in the present, Lloyd smirks to himself, thrilled by how immensely useful his novel knowledge continues to be. He strokes his chin with a cunning grin, eagerly anticipating the system notifications about to trigger. Right on cue, a system window pops up to inform him that Baron Frontera's approval rating has jumped by 6 points. Along with the affection boost, he earns 60 relationship points, raising his total available balance to 61. Lloyd grins wickedly as his plan succeeds, eager to finally summon a new power. Later that night, under a bright full moon, the forest grows quiet as owls hoot in the treetops. Lloyd sneaks out to the empty, quiet training grounds to perform his secret summon. He carefully looks over his shoulder in both directions to verify that no one is spying on him. Once confident he is alone, he summons the system screen and opens up the random summon game interface. Without hesitation, he presses the start button to spend 50 relationship points on a roll. Suddenly, a brilliant green flash erupts from the screen, taking Lloyd completely by surprise. Glowing green gears materialize and begin grinding loudly against one another as the summoning process begins. High above, the green glowing gears swirl together to complete a magical array with a loud whoosh. Lloyd looks up in utter shock as the bright green light bathes the entire area, wondering if it's an actual magic circle. Ancient-looking runes and gears spin rapidly within the glowing crest, making the summon look ridiculously elaborate. But as Lloyd gets a closer look, he can't help but yell at how insanely tiny and unbearable noisy the magic circle actually is. With a bright flash, the miniature array crackles with energy and finally bursts open. Out pops a tiny, cheerful hamster, squealing joyfully as it tumbles into existence. Lloyd stares back with an utterly deadpan expression, completely speechless at what just got summoned. The tiny creature plops harmlessly onto the dirt path right at the base of Lloyd's boot. It bounces up onto its feet with a cheerful smile, looking completely proud of itself. Lloyd towers over the tiny rodent, staring down in absolute silence as he digests the situation. Clicking his tongue in disappointment, Lloyd writes off the summon as a total dud. Hearing itself called a dud, the hamster gasps in utter horror, tears welling up in its eyes. It starts squeaking frantically to protest, leading a bewildered Lloyd to ask if it claims it can actually help him. Lloyd mockingly asks if it shoots acorns like a pea shooter, but then decides to let the little guy show what it can do. The hamster immediately starts chewing heavily on its puffed-out cheek pouches. With a sudden spit, it coughs up 2 slobber-covered pieces of paper right onto the ground, grossing Lloyd out. Disgusted, Lloyd carefully picks up the dripping papers using only his fingertips, reading that it's the Podong user manual. As Podong cutely wipes its face, Lloyd reads that the hamster's name is Podong and that it needs lots of love. Opening the included pouch, Lloyd pours out a handful of red and blue sunflower seeds, reading that they alter Podong's size. The manual explains that feeding Podong a red seed turns it gigantic for up to 12 hours. Meanwhile, blue seeds will shrink Podong back to its original small form before the 12-hour limit expires. Squatting down, Lloyd notes that purchasing a new set of these color-coded seeds costs 1 RP. Curious, he asks Podong just how big it can actually get, and the hamster eagerly encourages him to test it out. Realizing that a human-sized hamster could be incredible for digging tunnels, Lloyd offers Podong a red seed. Podong eagerly snatches the red seed and starts munching away frantically, ready to show off its true power. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupts as Podong begins to glow, catching Lloyd completely off guard. Before he can even react, Lloyd is violently smacked in the face by the rapidly expanding creature. He flies through the air and crashes hard onto the dirt, groaning in pain from the sudden impact. Scrambling to sit up, Lloyd stares up in absolute disbelief at the massive entity towering before him. Standing tall is a colossal hamster, prompting Lloyd to wonder if it has grown to a staggering 15 feet. But as he looks closer, he realizes this giant beast is actually over 30 feet tall. The massive hamster wears a hilariously smug and cocky expression, clearly proud of its new size. A system notification pops up, revealing Podong's first skill is level 1 digging. With a flurry of rapid swipes, Podong immediately begins tearing through the ground like a drill. Another notification reveals its second skill, level 2 dirt packing. The giant hamster rolls its massive body along the tunnel, perfectly flattening and reinforcing the path. Finally, its third skill is shown to be level 1 cheek pockets. Podong stands with its cheeks stuffed to the absolute brim, looking incredibly silly. With a loud retch, the creature spits out a massive, slimy ball of compressed soil. The dense sphere of dirt slams onto the ground, splashing Lloyd with residue but leaving him unharmed. Drenched in slime but absolutely thrilled, Lloyd celebrates his new, living heavy machinery. Walking back inside, he realizes that bringing such a giant creature out of nowhere would raise too many suspicions. He devises a clever cover story, deciding to carry a summoning book and pretend to be a summoning master. With the excavation tool secured, Lloyd shifts his focus to securing the manual labor for his next project. The scene shifts to the vast, rolling green valleys of the Frontera barony under a bright sky. Lloyd gathers a large group of soldiers by the riverbank and commands them to repeat after him. He passionately shouts out his primary construction slogan, "Safety first." The 30 unmotivated soldiers of the Frontera barony repeat the slogan with complete confusion and exhaustion. Lloyd grows frustrated, wondering why his heavily indebted father hasn't laid off these useless, lazy soldiers. However, his frustration turns into a sly grin as he realizes he now has access to completely free labor. Lloyd stands before the lazy soldiers, shovel in hand, and loudly reminds them that they are indeed part of the army. He passionately declares that the true purpose of an army is to work, recalling his own past military days spent digging holes and pulling weeds. Pointing toward a massive mound of clay by the riverbank, Lloyd claims he spent the entire night digging it up himself. In reality, his giant summon Podong dug the entire pile in just 30 minutes, but Lloyd keeps that detail to himself. He announces that this clay is the key to their estate's renaissance through his new Ondal construction business, ordering them to move it all immediately. The soldiers look absolutely miserable and exhausted at the mere thought of doing actual manual labor. Lloyd remains unfazed by their gloomy reaction, as he fully expected their reluctance. Suddenly, a voice calls out to Lloyd, prompting him to turn around with his shovel still resting on his shoulder. It is Newman, the senior knight of the Frontera barony, who demands to know what Lloyd is trying to make his men do. Lloyd sports a devious smirk, having fully anticipated that the knight would come to confront him. Lloyd recalls that there are 3 knights in the territory, with Newman at the top and Byron serving beneath him. The third is Javier Azrahan, the incredibly powerful protagonist of the original novel. While Javier and Byron remain loyal when the estate eventually falls, Newman is destined to be the very first to betray them and flee. This is because Newman secretly sells information about the Baron to con artists, directly causing the family's massive debt. Knowing this betrayal, Lloyd decides he cannot allow such a corrupt man to remain the territory's top knight. Lloyd turns to Newman with a smug smile, casually asking the knight what he thinks is happening. Newman haughtily replies that he won't tolerate his honorable soldiers being ordered to cover themselves in dirt. Lloyd internally scoffs at the hypocrisy, knowing Newman is just upset that the debt might actually get paid off, before calmly stating he has his father's permission. Newman questions how Lloyd fooled the Baron and patronizingly brings up Lloyd's notorious past behavior. The senior knight accuses Lloyd of using the soldiers solely for his own selfish personal gain. Newman smugly asks if he is wrong, while Lloyd quietly closes his eyes in response. Lloyd opens a mocking eye and surprisingly agrees with the knight's assessment. Lloyd's expression turns chillingly dark as he warns Newman that he is cruising for a beatdown. Newman's face twists in pure rage, prompting Lloyd to mentally mock how easily triggered the fragile knight is. Ready to settle things, Lloyd slams his shovel firmly into the dirt to begin the real confrontation. With a wild swing, Lloyd scoops up a pile of dirt and hurls it straight at the pompous knight, catching him completely off guard. The onlookers gasp in sheer disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would pull such a dirty, underhanded trick on a noble knight. Newman quickly shields himself from the flying debris, but his pristine pride is already stained by the sudden mud attack. Lloyd merely smirks, thoroughly enjoying the success of his cheap provocation. Trembling with rage, Newman looks down at his soiled boots, barely able to contain his boiling anger. He turns his vein-popping, red face toward Lloyd, screaming that a worthless scoundrel from a bankrupt family has no right to insult a knight's honor. Lloyd playfully cups his ear, deliberately misinterpreting the knight's rage as a challenge to settle things with a fair fight regardless of status. He effortlessly spins the shovel in his hand like a seasoned staff fighter, showing off his casual confidence. With a dramatic flourish, he points the tip of the shovel directly at Newman's chest. With a cocky smile, Lloyd officially proposes they settle their differences right here and now in a duel. Seething with hatred, Newman vows to make this insolent punk regret ever crossing him. Sometime later back at the estate, the official terms are set. A duel will take place in exactly 1 month. Javier looks at Lloyd with a skeptical expression, asking if he actually has any confidence in winning against a trained knight. Lloyd immediately scoffs at the question, bluntly admitting that there's absolutely no way he can win. He points to his head and lectures Javier, reminding him that Newman is a certified sword expert who can harness mana, while he himself is just an ordinary guy. Javier sighs deeply, his hand resting on his hilt as he silently admits he was on the verge of taking Newman out himself. Javier reflects on Lloyd's bizarre behavior, initially thinking Lloyd had simply reverted to his old, reckless hooligan habits. However, Javier realizes the move was highly calculated, strategically separating them to pick a fight while securing Bayern to supervise the soldiers. But seeing Lloyd casually pick his nose, Javier's respect quickly vanishes into disgust, wishing he could just slice this gross noble down. Snapping out of his thoughts, Lloyd rubs his hands together with a sly grin, announcing that he has a special task for Javier. With a bright, shameless smile, Lloyd asks Javier to teach him the art of swordsmanship. Without a single second of hesitation, Javier delivers a cold, flat refusal. Lloyd immediately whines in protest, but Javier reminds him that his only official duty is to act as a bodyguard and observer. Javier brutally adds that giving sword training to a piece of human trash like Lloyd would only make him a bigger danger to everyone around him. Brushing off the harsh insults, Lloyd simply sighs and asks for a straight answer on whether Javier is going to help him or not. Lloyd delivers his trump card, asking Javier if he would change his mind if teaching him swordplay meant finally curing his relentless insomnia. Javier is completely taken aback, wondering how on earth this trash master could possibly know his deepest, most exhausting secret. With a confident smirk, Lloyd gloats that he read all about it in the book and even knows the exact underlying cause of Javier's sleepless nights. Lloyd explains the ranking system from the original novel, where knights are categorized into 4 distinct tiers of mastery. He points out that Javier is on the very cusp of becoming a superhuman sword master, meaning his senses are so incredibly heightened that sleep has become impossible. In short, this agonizing insomnia is merely a natural side effect of reaching such an elite level of power. Knowing Javier has no way of figuring this out in such a remote area, Lloyd presses him for a deal, telling him his exhaustion is plain as day. Realizing he has been completely read, Javier lets out a heavy, defeated sigh. Javier reluctantly agrees to give it a try, prompting an ecstatic Lloyd to quickly lock in the deal before he can change his mind. Smirking, Javier warns him that he is bound to fail, listing the countless remedies, therapies, and medicines he has already tried to no avail. But in a hilarious twist, Javier is suddenly shown fast asleep in a rocking chair, clutching a pillow tightly. Lloyd laughs triumphantly, boasting that he had Javier completely figured out from the very beginning. Recalling that Javier first fell asleep listening to a magic spell in the novel, Lloyd reveals his own secret method. Instead of magic, Lloyd simply read aloud from his reinforced concrete textbook, a subject so incredibly dry it acts as the ultimate sleep aid. With Javier finally out cold, Lloyd erupts into a devious grin, declaring that Javier's legendary swordsmanship will soon be his. The next morning arrives with bright sunshine and the peaceful sound of birds chirping in the trees. Fully rested and looking refreshed, Javier wastes no time and immediately orders Lloyd to run 50 laps around the training ground. Lloyd stares back with a blank, unenthusiastic expression, realizing the physical torture has officially begun. Without saying a word, Lloyd turns his back and prepares to start his grueling warm-up. Javier watches in utter disbelief as the notoriously lazy Lloyd actually starts running without a single word of complaint. As Lloyd slowly makes his way around the massive perimeter, Javier keeps a close eye on his progress. The young master continues his steady jog, determined to prove he can handle the physical strain. However, the silence doesn't last long as Lloyd runs past, whining loudly about how much he hates running and demanding to learn actual combat skills. Despite his loud protests, Lloyd keeps his feet moving, heading off to complete another lap. On his next pass, Lloyd smugly points at Javier, teasing him for thinking he would just give up and refuse the training. As Lloyd chugs along the training ground, his heavy breaths echo across the field, while Javier silently watches from a distance. Sprinting up close, Lloyd smugly points his finger at Javier, mocking him for planning to declare he lacked talent and refused to train him. Javier can only wince in silence, hit directly in the mark by Lloyd's uncanny accuracy. Laughing triumphantly, Lloyd dashes back onto the track to complete his remaining laps. His taunting triggers a system alert leveling up his annoying brat skill, prompting Lloyd to yell back at the screen in outrage. His boots slam heavily onto the dirt as he keeps up his relentless sprint. Drenched in sweat, Lloyd privately admits that the physical toll is undeniably brutal. However, he reminds himself that this strain is nothing compared to the agony of his past life in Korea. He remembers waking up alone every morning in a tiny, depressing boarding house room with no family to welcome him. Back then, he spent grueling days hauling heavy loads of bricks up 4 stories of concrete stairs. When night fell, his ordeal continued as he loaded and unloaded delivery trucks in dark warehouses. He pushed through the bleeding hands and sheer exhaustion purely to survive, holding onto the hope of a better tomorrow. He used to tell himself to endure just a little longer, believing a brighter future was waiting ahead. He had reached out desperately toward that warm spark of hope, telling himself he deserved a better life. Straining with everything he had, he reached for that glowing promise. Instead, his overworked body gave out, his eyes widening in tragic realization. The light vanished, leaving his desperate hand grasping at absolute darkness. He collapsed in the void, broken under the weight of his endless struggle and unrewarded labor. Shaking off the nightmare of his past, Lloyd roars with fury as he pushes through the physical pain of his present run. Sprinting under the bright moonlight, he laughs with sheer joy, knowing this physical strain is child's play compared to his past despair. Javier silently watches Lloyd's tireless effort from the side of the track. Impressed by such fierce determination, Javier resolves to genuinely pass down his personal sword techniques. A system notification immediately pops up, announcing a 1-point increase in Javier's approval rating. Despite the boost, the window reveals his total approval with Javier still sits at a grim -28. Nevertheless, the system awards him 18 relation points, bringing his current total to 29. Under the cover of a quiet night, the full moon shines brightly over the grand stone walls of the estate. Inside, Newman stands before the Baron, voicing his disbelief at the young master's blatant disrespect toward a loyal family servant. The Baron sighs heavily, admitting he truly thought his son had finally matured, only to be proven disappointingly wrong. Acknowledging that he has no valid reason to stop the duel, the Baron instructs Newman not to be too harsh on his heir. He urges the knight to teach the boy a lesson to snap him back to his senses, but to avoid causing any serious injuries. Newman bows respectfully, promising to carry out his lord's wishes during the match. However, a sinister smirk creeps across Newman's face, as he silently notes that duels can often take an unpredictable turn. As he walks down the corridor, he begins plotting to decapitate the cocky young master, wondering how the Baron will react to his death. His thoughts spiral into madness as he plans to assassinate the Baron and Baroness next, framing it as a suicide so he can finally leave this small village. Chuckling to himself, Newman relishes how the foolish young master has inadvertently accelerated his plans to seize everything. A month quickly passes, and the day of the highly anticipated duel finally arrives under a bright morning sky. An anxious crowd gathers around the arena, murmuring in confusion as Lloyd stands opposite a fully armed Newman while holding a shovel. From the viewing stands, the Baroness and Baron watch with deep concern, while Javier remains silent and observant. Newman draws his sword with a smug expression, mockingly asking the young master if he is truly ready. Lloyd plants his boots firmly on the ground, resting the heavy metal spade of his shovel in the dirt. With a quick, practiced kick, he flips the shovel up into the air. He catches and swings the heavy tool with ease, confidently declaring that he is indeed ready. Sporting a wide, cocky grin, Lloyd boldly promises to knock the knight completely unconscious. The spectators erupt into bewildered murmurs, completely stunned that he intends to fight a renowned knight with a gardening tool. Newman's veins bulge in absolute fury, feeling deeply insulted by the young master's ridiculous choice of weapon. Watching from the stands, Javier finally understands why Lloyd had commissioned a solid iron shovel from the blacksmith. The Baron facepalms in utter despair, believing his son's supposed reform was nothing but a massive joke. However, Javier silently disagrees, knowing firsthand that the young master has been dead serious this entire time. He recalls the grueling physical training Lloyd endured in the dead of night, pushing his body to the absolute limit without a single complaint. He also remembers how Lloyd tirelessly worked at construction sites, teaching the village engineers the complex design of the Ondal system. Javier remembers how Lloyd would practice his swordplay relentlessly every single night right up until the moment he went to sleep. Looking at Lloyd's intense focus, Javier realizes that this isn't the behavior of a man playing a joke. His young master is more serious than he has ever been. The referee raises his hand and loudly declares the official start of the highly anticipated duel between Lloyd Frontera and Sir Newman. Sir Newman steps forward with a grim look, confidently brandishing his massive, heavy sword to prepare for the clash. In stark contrast, Lloyd takes a bizarrely awkward stance while holding a regular digging shovel, flashing a cheeky grin. Watching from the sidelines, Javier can't help but feel bewildered by Lloyd's completely lackluster and unprofessional posture. Furious at being mocked, Newman leaps high into the air and swings his giant blade downward, screaming at Lloyd for treating this like a game. With absolute composure, Lloyd thrusts his shovel forward, aiming the flat metal head directly at the incoming strike. A loud clang echoes across the arena as the shovel perfectly parries Newman's heavy sword, leaving the knight completely stunned. Both Javier and the referee watch in utter disbelief, unable to comprehend how a simple shovel just blocked a knight's heavy attack. Snapping out of his shock, a frustrated Newman swings his sword once more, declaring that such dumb luck won't save Lloyd a second time. But with another sharp clang, Lloyd effortlessly deflects the follow-up slash with a precise and fluid motion of his shovel. Javier's eyes widen as he recognizes the sheer efficiency of Lloyd's movements, realizing it is a combat style refined purely for practical, life-or-death situations. To Javier, it feels as though the traditional swordsmanship they know has somehow evolved over centuries into this highly optimized style. Newman gasps in shock as Lloyd instantly closes the distance, pointing the tip of the shovel directly at his face. Flashing a smug grin, Lloyd wonders why the knight is so surprised, thinking to himself that any modern Korean man would easily know this technique. He reveals the secret behind his stance. It is the absolute pinnacle of modern military close-quarters combat, bayonet training. Lloyd thrusts the shovel forward like a spear, forcing Newman to desperately lean back as Lloyd notes that a shovel is far more dangerous than people realize. He demonstrates its defensive capability, using the wide, sturdy metal blade of the shovel as a makeshift shield to block another incoming blow. Then he jabs the sharp edge forward, reminding us that an instrument designed to cut through thick tree roots can easily slice through a man. Stepping down firmly onto the shovel's metal shoulder, Lloyd prepares to execute his next bizarre move. To everyone's absolute bewilderment, Lloyd begins bouncing around the battlefield on his shovel like a human pogo stick. Laughing like a complete maniac, Lloyd bounces high into the air and taunts the sweating knight to bring on his best shot. Javier's awe instantly evaporates into pure sweat-inducing confusion, wondering if Lloyd's entire serious display was just a massive joke after all. But Lloyd doesn't care about their confusion, letting out a wild, villainous laugh as he thoroughly enjoys dominating the duel with his trusty tool. Javier is left completely dumbfounded, sweating profusely as he tries to process whether his master is actually being serious or just playing a massive prank. Enraged by the sheer disrespect of being fought with a gardening tool, Hyun-min lets out a furious roar as he charges forward. But Lloyd is completely unfazed, firmly stepping forward and declaring that this very shovel was his first prepared weapon to take Hyun-min down. With incredible speed, Lloyd executes the basic defensive steps he learned from Javier, parrying Hyun-min's strikes with the metal head of his shovel. Hyun-min's wrists ache under the sudden impact, utterly bewildered at how a supposedly weak noble can possess such overwhelming physical power. That's when Lloyd reveals his ultimate secret weapon, his newly unlocked shoveling skill expansion, which fuses his mind with the tool and massively boosts all his physical stats. He recalls how his hard work finally paid off, earning approval points from Javier's training, as well as his shocked parents who watched him sweat for the first time in his life. Those precious points pushed his total RP to 97, allowing him to easily spend 40 points to purchase this game-changing skill. All those grueling hours of manual labor in the dirt had finally rewarded him with the most absurd yet powerful combat skill imaginable. Back in the present, Lloyd confidently closes the distance, ready to show Hyun-min the true power of a master laborer. Recognizing that his opponent is far more dangerous than he looks, Hyun-min takes a deep breath to steady his racing heart. He admits that he never expected to go all out against a mere civilian, unsheathing his weapon with deadly intent. Suddenly, a powerful surge of blue mana begins to swirl around Hyun-min's body as he prepares to unleash his true strength. Javier's eyes narrow as he immediately senses the shift in the atmosphere, realizing what Hyun-min is about to do. The dense, glowing energy flows rapidly down Hyun-min's arm, supercharging his physical capabilities. A brilliant vortex of light forms directly over his chest, signaling the activation of his inner core. Lloyd watches with a cold, analytical glare, recognizing the technique immediately. It is the legendary Mana Heart, a technique that grants swordsmen an explosive boost in destructive power. Gripping his sword with both hands, Hyun-min prepares to end this ridiculous duel once and for all. With a smug grin, Hyun-min warns Lloyd that the real fight is only just beginning. Lloyd remains completely silent, his eyes hidden in shadow as he waits for the incoming strike. In an instant, Hyun-min lunges forward, creating a massive shockwave of wind that kicks up a blinding cloud of dust. Javier looks on in deep concern, knowing that mastering a Mana Heart takes years of grueling training, making it impossible for Lloyd to block such an attack. Hyun-min unleashes a devastating downward slash, aiming to cleave right through Lloyd and his ridiculous shovel. Under normal circumstances, this would be a fatal mistake, but Lloyd is anything but normal. Lloyd steadies his grip on the shovel, his eyes turning completely blank as he prepares to meet the incoming blow head-on. Hyun-min sneers in absolute confidence, shouting that he will shatter Lloyd's pathetic tool and his head in a single, devastating strike. The onlookers can only watch in sheer terror, gasping in dread at what they assume will be a gruesome end for the young master. With a resounding slam, Hyun-min's massive blade collides directly with the flat edge of Lloyd's shovel, creating a blinding flash of impact. But instead of splitting the shovel in half, the impact stops completely, leaving Hyun-min utterly dumbfounded as his weapon is halted. Suddenly, Hyun-min's legs begin to tremble and stagger as he feels the vital energy draining rapidly from his entire body. Lloyd flashes a devious, wicked grin, mentally preparing to unleash the secret fourth weapon he has kept hidden up his sleeve. This secret weapon is none other than the legendary mana conjuring skill that eventually makes Javier the strongest knight in the entire world. It is the legendary Azrahan core technique, allowing Lloyd to forcefully siphon the flowing mana directly out of his opponent. Hyun-min screams in absolute agony as his sword is deflected, realizing to his horror that his very mana is being sucked dry. Taking full advantage of his opponent's weakened state, Lloyd winds up his shovel for a massive, decisive swing. With a brutal whack, the heavy metal shovel connects squarely with Hyun-min's arrogant face, completely shattering his composure. The sheer force of the impact sends one of Hyun-min's teeth launching high into the clear blue sky. Dazed and disoriented, Hyun-min's mind struggles to comprehend the strange white object flying through the air. As he tumbles backward, he realizes with a sinking heart that the flying object is indeed his own molar. Lloyd effortlessly spins his trusty shovel around with a metallic ring, while Hyun-min lets out a pathetic groan of defeat. Standing triumphantly under the bright sky, Lloyd raises his shovel high above his head like a victorious warrior. Hyun-min's face is driven violently into the dirt, his eyes comically bulging out from the sheer impact of his fall. With a final slam, Hyun-min lies completely spread-eagled and unconscious on the ground, thoroughly defeated by a simple digging tool. The surrounding soldiers stand frozen in absolute disbelief, their eyes wide as they process the impossible victory they just witnessed. Javier looks on with his usual calm demeanor, while the stunned official beside him can barely break his paralyzed silence. Confused whispers quickly ripple through the entire crowd as they struggle to accept that the notorious lowlife Lloyd actually won. Stuttering in disbelief, the official reluctantly raises his hand to formally declare Lloyd Frontera the official winner of the duel. Newman stares blankly from the dirt, his mind screaming in denial that a certified sword expert like himself could lose to a complete joke of a noble. Lloyd casually steps right up to the defeated knight, smugly asking if he heard the official announcement of his utter defeat. With the official duel finally concluded, Lloyd casually rests his shovel on his shoulder, acting as if the hardest part of the day is behind him. But his relaxed demeanor quickly vanishes as he raises the shovel high with a menacing glare, declaring that it is now time for Newman to receive a personal beating. Lying defeated in the dirt, Newman can only stare up in absolute terror as he realizes the crazy young noble is actually going to strike him. Seeing his son's sudden, violent turn, Baron Frontera screams in panic, desperately trying to remind Lloyd that the duel has officially ended. Completely ignoring his father's warning, Lloyd morphs into a maniacal devil, relentlessly whacking the screaming knight with his shovel. The Baron can only watch in sheer disbelief, his eyes bulging as he shouts his son's name at the top of his lungs. Desperate to prevent a diplomatic disaster, the estate guards rush onto the field and physically restrain Lloyd, shouting for him to stop. Watching the chaotic spectacle from the sidelines, the Baron wonders if his son has completely lost his mind, while Javier remains dead silent. Javier stares intently at the scene, quietly questioning whether Lloyd has truly lost his senses, or if there is a deeper calculation behind this outburst. Seemingly giving up, Lloyd suddenly calms down and tells the flustered guards to let go of him. He stands there casually and lets out a relaxed sigh, making everyone think that he has finally finished venting his anger. But in a flash, Lloyd lunges forward once more, grabbing the shovel to land several more brutal whacks on the groaning Newman. As the sounds of the impact echo through the arena, Javier closely analyzes Lloyd's movements from his perspective. He realizes that Lloyd isn't swinging wildly at all. Instead, he is precisely targeting non-lethal spots to maximize Newman's physical pain. Javier notices Lloyd's eerily calm expression, which suggests he has already calculated every single outcome of this brutal beating. It is as if Lloyd possesses some sort of future knowledge, orchestrating everything perfectly to fit his ultimate agenda. This reminds Javier of a conversation from 15 days before the duel, when Lloyd suddenly demanded to be taught the legendary Azrahan core technique. At the time, Javier was stunned by the request, prompting Lloyd to jokingly ask why he looked like a criminal on the run. Lloyd then accurately described how the technique draws in mana from the surrounding environment rather than just the user's internal reserves. An astonished Javier demanded to know how Lloyd could possibly know about an unfinished technique that he had never shared with anyone. With an incredibly shameless smile, Lloyd claimed that Javier talked about the secret technique in his sleep whenever Lloyd sang him a lullaby. Javier couldn't believe this brazen lie, yet he knew there was no other logical way Lloyd could have acquired such classified information. Javier politely refused the request, explaining that he couldn't teach a technique that wasn't even finished yet. Seizing the opportunity, Lloyd slyly asked if that meant Javier would teach it to him once they perfected it together. Javier agreed to the deal, though he couldn't help but sweat at the sheer, unearned confidence radiating from the young noble. Sticking his sword firmly into the ground, Lloyd tells Javier to pay close attention to his explanation. He breaks down the problem, guessing that Javier is trying to draw in surrounding ambient mana and force it directly into his own mana heart. Because the mana heart treats external energy as a foreign entity, the mana simply bounces off without fusing. Lloyd suggests shifting his perspective entirely. Instead of forcing the absorbed mana inside the mana heart, he should condense the external energy into a distinct, separate sphere right beside it. By allowing it to orbit around his core, he can control the mana externally without causing internal rejection. He compares the concept to installing an auxiliary engine alongside a main engine so they operate in harmony while remaining separate. Javier is stunned to realize how logically sound the concept is, even though he has no idea what an engine is. Seeing Javier's reaction, Lloyd cheerfully claps and pretends he was just spitballing, putting on his usual smug poker face. With that single revelation, Javier is finally able to perfect the Azrahan core technique he had struggled with for so long. On his very first attempt, he successfully forms 3 orbiting mana circles around his core, unlocking a tremendous new power. Right on cue, a system notification pops up to announce that Javier's approval rating has increased by 5 points. Lloyd freaks out hysterically, declaring he has no interest in high-level mana manipulation and only wants to learn how to absorb impact energy. Equipped with this simplified application, Lloyd decides he now has everything he needs to defeat Sir Newman. True to his word, Lloyd easily wins the fight, though his retainers have to drag him back as he furiously tries to beat Newman with a shovel. The magistrate shouts in rage from the viewing stand, ordering Lloyd to stop immediately before he ruins a knight's honor. An awkward silence settles over the arena as everyone watches the unhinged noble being dragged away from the beaten knight. Panting heavily, Lloyd scoffs with total contempt at the notion of Newman possessing any honor. He points his shovel toward the grandstand and tells the magistrate to check beneath his tablecloth before speaking of honor. Curious and confused, the magistrate lifts the white cloth and finds a hidden stack of wax-sealed letters. As he opens one of the letters and reads its contents, the magistrate's face pales in absolute horror. Lloyd calmly explains that those are secret messages exchanged between Sir Newman and Tords, the fraudster behind the real estate scam. The letters contain detailed reports on the territory's finances, the Lord's personal habits, and explicit schemes to forge property deeds. Regaining consciousness, Newman breaks into a cold sweat, terrified as to how Lloyd found letters he had hidden deep within a wall. With a wicked smirk, Lloyd silently remembers that Javier was originally supposed to uncover those exact documents much later in the novel. Lloyd recalls that he had his trusty summon, Padong, scamper through the walls last night to retrieve the hidden letters. Shocked by the undeniable proof, the Baron slumps back into his seat, completely overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. Looking down at them, the Baron thinks to himself that Lloyd truly is a kind person just like the story described, as anyone else would be demanding Newman's head. However, Lloyd begins to speak, starting with a polite but firm apology. He sternly points out that being a kind leader and being a good leader are two entirely different things. Lloyd addresses the noble council, offering a specific suggestion on how they should deal with the traitorous Newman. He proposes a bizarre test, dropping a vicious mouse on Newman's head, where injury means exile, and survival means demotion to a foot soldier with a chance to repent. The surrounding crowd murmurs in confusion, wondering why on earth a mouse is being used, believing Newman could easily handle such a small creature. The Baron tries to decipher Lloyd's true intentions, assuming this is a clever test of mercy that keeps Newman under threat of greater punishment. The officials agree that this proposal is incredibly wise and generous, serving as a perfect warning to anyone else who might consider betrayal. With a nod of approval, the Baron officially agrees to go along with Lloyd's unusual punishment. When asked if he has any objections, a weeping Newman eagerly accepts, expressing deep gratitude for what he thinks is a merciful sentence. Looking down at the groveling man, Lloyd inwardly scoffs at the word mercy. Lloyd reflects on the reality of human nature, questioning if a guilty party would ever truly repent just because they were shown mercy. The answer to that question is a resounding not a chance. Instead, the guilty will only view their punisher as soft, growing more cunning as they plot a way to overthrow them. True to form, Newman is already grinning like a maniac, silently swearing to get revenge on both the Baron and his lowlife son. Noticing the traitor's expression, Lloyd smiles back warmly, mocking him by saying it will be the last time he ever smiles. Newman's confidence instantly evaporates, and he nervously asks what Lloyd could possibly mean by that. Lloyd simply asks him what he thinks it means while presenting Padong with a massive special seed. With a dramatic motion, Lloyd flings the little hamster high up into the bright blue sky. Looking up, Lloyd coldly notes that the best way to ask for forgiveness is to remember that there is absolutely none to be found here. High in the air, Padong bites down on the seed, shattering it with a loud crunch. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupts from the tiny hamster as it begins to transform. Watching the sky light up, the Baron and his wife stare in absolute shock, completely unprepared for what is about to descend upon them. Xavier and the Baron can only watch in sheer disbelief, sweat dripping down their faces as the sky cracks open. The surrounding crowd of villagers gasps in unison, their eyes wide with terror at the colossal spectacle unfolding above them. Descending from the heavens is none other than Padong, now transformed into a gargantuan, chubby hamster floating gracefully down toward the earth. The corrupt noble's jaw drops so low it practically hits the floor, his single monocle barely holding onto his bulging eye in absolute horror. With a cheerful expression, the massive beast plummets directly toward the cowering noble, who can only cover his head and pray for survival. A colossal explosion of dust and debris erupts as the giant hamster slams into the ground, while Lloyd stands by casually with his shovel. The dust settles to reveal the massive summon lying flat on its stomach in a crater, completely flattening the target as Lloyd mockingly notes what a shame it is. Pointing triumphantly to the sky, Lloyd proudly declares that the rotten apple of the land has finally been exiled. Peace returns to the beautiful, sprawling valley, But Lloyd's ambitious plans for the estate are only just beginning. Suddenly, the giant hamster begins vigorously clawing at the earth, kicking up dirt with immense power. It continues to dig at a lightning-fast pace, clearing away mounds of soil with its massive paws. Charging straight through the village streets, the giant beast acts as a living bulldozer, perfectly leveling the dirt road ahead. Confused by the sudden construction work, Xavier asks what the creature is doing, only for Lloyd to smugly explain that it is paving a brand new road. Even the notoriously timid members of the engineering unit are brought in, looking exhausted and anxious as they carry heavy supplies. But under Lloyd's intense motivation, they instantly transform into muscular, hyper-focused workhorses burning with passionate energy. Lloyd references the ancient empire of Rome and their legendary Appian Way, explaining how a great civilization is built on superior roads. He outlines his grand vision to pave a massive highway stretching all the way from the Baron's mansion to the eastern hillside. When Xavier questions the necessity of such a massive road, Lloyd simply tells him to shut up and watch the magic happen. With a confident grin, Lloyd declares that this infrastructure will make their estate's popularity skyrocket, leaving Xavier completely speechless. However, Xavier's suspicion grows, and he asks the young master where he could have possibly learned all of these advanced techniques. He presses further, questioning how Lloyd designed a revolutionary heating system and summoned a high-level magical beast out of nowhere. The tension thickens as Xavier prepares to ask the ultimate question that Lloyd has been dreading. Staring intensely at his master, Xavier directly asks if he is truly the real young Master Lloyd. Instantly, a bright red system warning flashes before Lloyd's eyes, alerting him that Xavier is actively doubting his true identity. A cold sweat rolls down Lloyd's face as he realizes his secret might finally be exposed by his closest ally. Xavier stares down with an intense, piercing gaze, his sharp eyes filled with deep suspicion as he analyzes every detail of the man before him. Lloyd breaks into a cold sweat, recalling how Xavier's sharp personality in the original novel meant he would easily detect a total stranger occupying the body of the Baron's son. He imagines Xavier ruthlessly drawing his blade to execute an impostor, knowing full well that the protagonist is entirely capable of such lethal action. Fortunately, Lloyd has a secret weapon up his sleeve, a specialized skill he prepared specifically for this worst-case scenario. He immediately puts on a ridiculous, defensive expression, shouting that he simply studied in secret and questioning why that should be considered impossible. To back up his desperate lie, Lloyd activates his special skill, persistence, to double down on his absurd claims. When Xavier points out that the young master used to do nothing but drink, Lloyd retorts by asking if Xavier was watching him 24 hours a day, aggressively highlighting his own past trashy behavior as a perfect cover. Xavier remains unconvinced, pressing him on how a mere drunkard could pull off a summoning spell that would challenge even a wizard with 2 decades of experience. Lloyd flips the script, pointing out Xavier's own miraculous mana control in his 20s and calling him a genius, which catches the knight off guard. He dramatically yells that if Xavier can be a prodigy, there is absolutely no reason why he can't suddenly be a genius summoner himself. Stunned by this flawless, albeit chaotic logic, Xavier is left completely speechless, sweat rolling down his cheek. Seizing the moment, Lloyd declares he is leaving to check on something, successfully using his quick conversation sub-skill to shut down the interrogation. As he stomps away, Lloyd frantically hopes his bluff worked, desperately reassuring himself that everything is going to be fine. He approaches Knight Byron, instructing him to oversee the local arrangements while he is away, to which the loyal knight readily agrees. Xavier catches up, stating it is his duty to accompany and observe the young master, prompting Lloyd to act as if that was his plan all along. When Xavier asks where they are headed, Lloyd casually reveals they are going somewhere far away to collect some long-overdue debts. Their journey takes them to the Rudnia estate, a picturesque, remote small town nestled beneath a beautiful sunset sky. They arrive at a local establishment, marked by a rustic, hanging wooden sign that simply reads in. Inside one of the rooms, a furious fist slams down hard on a table, accompanied by an angry curse. This is Thorda, a notorious real estate scammer, who is currently losing his mind after losing a massive fortune to some gamblers. His heavily scarred bodyguard calmly points out that losing is just the nature of gambling, especially since it was all easy money he had scammed anyway. The bodyguard coldly threatens to abandon him on the spot if Thorda can no longer afford to pay for his escort services. Terrified of being left defenseless, Thorda frantically begs him to stay, promising even higher pay while the guard warns him that his patience has a strict deadline. Thorda schemes to swindle new victims to recoup his losses, deciding it is best to lay low since plenty of angry marks are currently hunting him down. Suddenly, An unexpected voice chimes in from the darkness, playfully asking if he happens to be referring to them. Without warning, the door is violently kicked open as Lloyd makes a dramatic entrance. Startled by the sudden intrusion, Thorda panics and demands to know what is wrong with him. Smiling smugly, Lloyd realizes they have no idea who he actually is since he is currently disguised. He introduces himself as Lloyd Frontera, asking if they finally get the picture now. Hearing that legendary name, Thorda is completely paralyzed with pure terror. While the bodyguard coldly asks if he should kill the intruder, Thorda desperately screams for them to run away instead. Instantly obeying, the giant bodyguard grabs Thorda like a ragdoll as the scammer lets out a pathetic shriek. With a powerful leap, the bodyguard crashes right through the glass window to make a quick escape. They descend rapidly into the narrow alleyway below, thinking they are in the clear. But as they land, the bodyguard senses a dangerous presence waiting for them. Standing in their path is Xavier, his hand gripped firmly around his sword. He draws his blade in a flash, ready to intercept the fleeing criminals. Under the moonlight, Xavier coldly orders the bodyguard to hand over Thorda or be treated as an accomplice. Xavier marvels at how perfectly everything is playing out, exactly as young Master Lloyd predicted. Lloyd had anticipated their exact escape route, telling Xavier to wait in this very alley. Realizing they've been outsmarted, the bodyguard curses the young master under his breath. He asks Xavier if he even knows how to use a sword as dark, crackling magical energy gathers in his hand. This marks the beginning of the battle for Xavier, who seeks revenge for his lost Baron by fighting Thord's deadly bodyguard. This is also the very first time Xavier has had to face a formidable black evil magician. In the original novel, Xavier struggled immensely against the overwhelming crushing force of gravity magic. Lloyd recalls this crucial piece of lore from the novel's original plotline. Back in the alley, the magician unleashes a powerful downward strike of gravity magic. Xavier stands his ground as the dark red magical projectile hurtles directly toward him. With incredible precision, Xavier slashes his sword, meeting the dark magic head-on. To his surprise, the dark energy disperses into black smoke, leaving him completely unscathed. However, the battle is far from over as a massive, crackling sphere of pink energy suddenly traps Xavier within its crushing grip. Believing he has the upper hand, the scarred villain reaches out, fully expecting Xavier to succumb to his power. With a clenched fist, the villain commands Xavier to die, unleashing the full brunt of his gravity-manipulating magic. The immense pressure forces Xavier to his knees, cracking the stone floor beneath him as he struggles to hold his ground. In the original novel, Xavier was merely a senior sword expert during this encounter. But things are different now. Suddenly, the villain's smug expression vanishes, replaced by sheer terror as he senses a massive shift in power. Xavier stands tall as a brilliant blue light begins to radiate directly from his chest. This version of Xavier possesses a formidable mana heart with triple circles, vastly outclassing his novel counterpart. With a single, effortless swing of his sword, Xavier shatters the gravity dome into harmless fragments. Unfazed by the attack, Xavier casually wonders if the magic he just broke was supposed to be gravity control. The villain stands frozen in absolute disbelief, sweating bullets as his ultimate spell is neutralized so easily. Realizing he is completely outmatched, the villain immediately flees the scene, leaving his furious client behind. Xavier slowly approaches the trembling scammer, reminding him of the severe consequences of swindling a nobleman. Terrified by Xavier's cold gaze, the green-haired man falls backward, desperately trying to scramble away. Xavier coldly threatens to sever his leg to ensure he can only crawl his way to the court of law. Xavier swings his blade downward with lethal precision, ready to carry out his threat. Suddenly, a loud voice echoes through the room, commanding Xavier to stop his blade. Lloyd rushes in and stands directly in front of the blade, shielding the terrified scammer with his own body. Lloyd frantically explains that Xavier will be the one facing punishment if he mutilates the man before trial. Xavier lowers his sword in surprise, deeply confused by Lloyd's sudden intervention. Xavier wonders if Lloyd has suddenly developed a sense of sympathy for a common criminal. Later that night, the quiet town rests peacefully under the glow of a bright full moon. Inside a dimly lit room, the scammer finds himself bound tightly to a chair, trembling with anxiety. Lloyd sits calmly across the table from his captive, while Xavier watches silently from the shadows. Flashing a friendly but suspicious smile, Lloyd tells the terrified man that there is absolutely no need to be so scared. Lloyd points out that people get greedy when their lives are on the line, leaving the captive sweating bullets in sheer confusion and terror. Lloyd casually mentions that decapitation is a bit too harsh, promising never to report him to the court, which gives the captive a sudden glimmer of hope. With a deceptively sweet smile, Lloyd asks if he's grateful, suggesting that he return all of the stolen money to show his appreciation. The captive eagerly agrees, desperately pleading that he will return every cent as long as Lloyd truly forgives him. Lloyd cheerfully agrees, acting as if showing mercy and getting repaid is simply how life is supposed to work. However, the captive can't help but feel a deep sense of dread as he stares at Lloyd's overly friendly expression. Lloyd reveals there is one more condition for his forgiveness, prompting the tied-up captive to beg to hear whatever it is. Lloyd slides a document and a pen forward, claiming that all he needs to do is sign the simple contract to settle everything. When the captive nervously asks what kind of document it is, Lloyd reassures him that it's just a standard employment contract where he'll still get paid. But then comes the catch. 80% of his salary will be automatically deducted to pay off his massive debt. The captive's soul practically leaves his body as the reality of this lifetime of financial slavery sinks in. To make matters worse, Lloyd cheerfully adds that the entire debt will finally be paid off in just 520 years. The captive lets out a silent scream of pure despair, realizing he has just been sentenced to multiple lifetimes of hard labor. Watching from behind, Xavier realizes that Lloyd never had any intention of showing genuine sympathy or mercy to this crook. In his mind, Lloyd laughs at the idea of execution, refusing to lose a single penny by killing off a perfectly good source of labor. He plans to squeeze every last drop of value out of this man for the rest of his natural life. The captive screams in protest over how incredibly unfair the contract is, but Lloyd only responds with a blank, uncaring stare. Flashing a terrifying glare, Lloyd threatens to either force his hand to sign it right now or drag him straight to a brutal trial in court. Sobbing hysterically, the defeated captive has no choice but to put pen to paper and sign away his entire existence. A few days later, a horse-drawn carriage travels down a peaceful forest path, carrying the group back home. Xavier suggests using the recovered money to pay off interest, but Lloyd immediately shuts him down, planning to reinvest it all into labor costs. Lloyd begins to worry if any of the citizens will actually apply for his job posting, wondering if his bad reputation is making them too uncomfortable. Soon, they arrive back at the Frontera estate, where a new recruitment drive is already underway. A prominent wooden sign is posted, advertising a massive salary of 20 gold coins for anyone willing to work at the Baron's mansion. To Lloyd's surprise, a massive line of eager applicants stretches down the road, all desperate for a chance at this high-paying job. Xavier wonders aloud if the local people still harbor hatred toward him, but Lloyd quickly reassures him that while they might, things are about to change. Xavier points out that Lloyd set a cheap price and a strict deadline for the Ondal heating system's construction, even summoning Xavier despite his expectations of punishing a traitor. He reminds Lloyd of his own words, questioning if Lloyd is truly acting like the trustworthy and capable man he claims to be. Looking at the massive stack of paperwork before him, Lloyd sweats nervously, wondering if his responsibilities are really going to be this overwhelming. The first applicant steps up, eagerly asking Lloyd for the work contract so he can officially sign up for the high-paying job. Instead of just signing, the applicant pauses to sincerely thank the young master first, catching Lloyd off guard. He explains that his child always suffers from severe colds during winter, but thanks to Lloyd's Ondal heating system, his family won't have to worry anymore. The grateful father bows deeply in front of the desk, expressing his profound gratitude to a stunned Lloyd. Lloyd smiles awkwardly, feeling a sudden wave of shame as he realizes his greedy business schemes are being mistaken for pure altruism. The man then mentions that he has relatives living in a neighboring territory known as the Reincarnated estate. He reveals that his relatives are highly interested and want to know if Lloyd can construct an Ondal system for them as well. This spark of interest is exactly what Lloyd was waiting for, representing the crucial first step of his grand master plan. Lloyd's inner villain emerges as he schemes to inflate the price for neighboring estates using travel expenses, aiming to sweep up all their gold. Lloyd happily agrees to the request while hinting at the extra travel costs, prompting Xavier to look on with utter disgust at his master's greedy expression. Xavier begins to suspect that Lloyd's entire motivation for building the Ondal system was purely to set up this massive, profitable trap. This realization makes Xavier wonder about Lloyd's true intentions regarding the mountain road currently under construction. Standing atop a high cliff overlooking the vast valley, Lloyd calls out to Xavier as they survey the surrounding land. Lloyd confidently predicts that the lush green mountain before them will soon be completely stripped bare, leaving Xavier thoroughly confused. He explains that because the Ondal heating systems require massive amounts of firewood, the local forests will quickly be depleted. Xavier is stunned by this environmental foresight, realizing the ecological toll Lloyd's heating systems will take. Xavier demands to know why Lloyd is pushing forward despite knowing this, only for Lloyd to reveal he is canceling the Appian Way road construction. Pointing toward a dark cave at the end of the path, Lloyd reveals his plan to mine bituminous coal as an alternative fuel source. Laughing maniacally with his shovel in hand, Lloyd declares they will sell the coal at premium prices once everyone becomes addicted to the warmth of the Ondal. Lloyd adds that his own citizens will get a microscopic discount, leaving Xavier appalled by his master's incredibly stingy and ruthless business tactics. Sensing the judgment, Lloyd turns to a flinching Xavier with a sharp glare, asking if he truly finds his brilliant business strategy unfair. Lloyd defends his ruthless strategy, pointing out that without these measures, they would have no way of paying off the estate's massive debt. This harsh reality leaves Xavier completely speechless, unable to argue against the cold, hard truth of their financial situation. Although he reluctantly agrees that this is their best option for now, Xavier still harbors some lingering doubts. He warns Lloyd that the opposing baron, completely unaware of the valuable bituminous coal, won't just sit idly by. When Xavier mentions how other barons tried and failed repeatedly, Lloyd dismissively cuts him off, stating he already knows the tunnel collapsed due to weak ground. With an incredibly confident smirk, Lloyd declares that where others failed, he will easily succeed. His secret weapon is modern excavation technology, specifically his knowledge of the advanced shield method for tunneling. Lloyd excitedly rallies them to get to work, leaving Xavier utterly baffled by yet another incomprehensible term from his master. Despite his confusion, Xavier resolves to watch and see what this completely transformed young master will pull off next. They soon arrive at the site, finding the entrance of the old mine completely blocked by massive piles of collapsed white stone. The heavy rubble seals the dark cavern shut, presenting a seemingly impassable barrier to any ordinary worker. Deep inside the unstable cavern, the fragile rock walls are heavily fractured and ready to cave in at any moment. Suddenly, a massive, jointed insect leg scrapes sharply against the subterranean rock face. More segmented limbs begin to skitter across the dark cracks, signaling the presence of something lurking in the shadows. Out of the absolute darkness, dozens of glowing red eyes materialize, revealing a hidden swarm. A terrifying, giant subterranean ant emerges from the dark, its eyes burning with a hostile red glare. An entire swarm of these massive, monstrous insects begins to crawl down the walls, ready to defend their territory. Unfazed by the subterranean threat, Lloyd clasps his hands together in a focused prayer pose. He loudly commands a summon, instantly manifesting a glowing green magic circle around himself. Chanting the ridiculous name of a high-end Gangnam apartment, he unleashes a towering pillar of green magical energy. The powerful beam pierces straight through the clouds, lighting up the entire sky with a brilliant green glow. The magical light condenses into a single, sparkling star high above the forest canopy. To anyone's absolute shock, a massive, modern high-rise apartment building begins descending directly from the heavens. The sheer absurdity of the summon leaves the narrator wishing they possessed such an incredibly overpowered skill themselves. Back in reality, Lloyd is seen lazily tracing lines on a blueprint with his glowing finger, letting out a tired sigh. Using his intermediate design skill, Lloyd slowly traces a floor plan with a glowing green light, complaining about how long the manual process takes. Exhausted by the effort, Lloyd dramatically throws his head back, wishing he could just summon 100 undead workers to do all his labor for free. When the system bluntly suggests he just draw by hand if he's going to complain, Lloyd quickly backtracks, admitting that the glowing finger skill is actually pretty cool. His current progress is all thanks to the Newman incident, which earned him a massive 639 reputation points from the Baroness, Xavier, and others. Lloyd spent those precious points upgrading his base design and base measurement skills all the way to intermediate level, unlocking powerful new options like underground scanning. With his reputation points fully invested, he successfully secured these game-changing abilities for his upcoming projects. Standing before a massive, collapsed stone cave, Lloyd realizes this is the exact spot where they need to begin digging. Activating his newly acquired intermediate measurement skill, Lloyd's eyes glow with green crosshairs as he initiates an underground scan. A green holographic scan reveals the internal structure of the cave, allowing him to map out a safe route even though the scan's range is limited to 5 meters. But a new problem arises. Manual labor is too slow, and a human worker would tire out long before completing such an arduous excavation. To make matters worse, Padong fell ill from the previous road construction project, and even if he recovered, his giant form would be too dangerous to use here. With his main worker out of commission, Lloyd realizes he has only one viable option left to solve his labor shortage. He pulls up the system interface for a fantasy species random draw, confident that his remaining 119 reputation points are more than enough. As Lloyd sits patiently on the stone path, a green portal opens up, chanting a bizarre, tongue-twisting incantation that leaves him completely speechless. Out of the glowing green magic circle emerges a mysterious, round white object adorned with a cute bow. The glowing object reveals itself to be an incredibly adorable, pink, round creature with sparkling eyes and a cheerful smile. With a soft plop, the tiny pink creature lands right on the stone pavement in front of a curious Lloyd. Wiggling happily, the little pink snake-like beast introduces itself with a cute chirp, calling out, "Belle, Belle." Lloyd stares at the tiny thing in disbelief, wondering if it's meant for stealthy assassinations, or if it's just completely useless. He quickly reminds himself that Padong also looked harmless at first, meaning this new summon must possess some hidden, powerful utility. He begins questioning the creature, asking if it can also grow into a giant using sunflower seeds and if it has a maximum skill level, receiving enthusiastic nods in response. Flashing a friendly smile, Lloyd gently asks the little summon if it can demonstrate its special ability. The adorable creature beams with joy, closing its eyes as it happily prepares to show off its power. Fast forward a few weeks later, and the construction site at the cave entrance has undergone a massive transformation. In the first step of their operation, a now gigantic Belle acts as a living shield machine, effortlessly chewing through the thick dirt and rock ahead. Belle kicks off the digging process with her level 1 scooping dirt skill, packing her mouth full of soil as she clears the path. Immediately after, her level 1 digesting soil skill activates, prompting Lloyd to warn Xavier to get ready for the next phase. Gripping his sword tightly, a sweat-drenched Xavier braces himself, fully focused on the task ahead. As Belle's body continues to rumble from processing the earth, Lloyd screams out for Xavier to stand by. The young knight stands firm, ready to unleash his blade the moment the digested material is released. In step 2, Belle triggers her steel launch skill, shooting out white-hot, glowing rods of refined metal at high speed. For step 3, Xavier instantly leaps into action, swinging his sword with absolute precision to slice the incoming steel rods into perfect segments. In step 4, the hardworking blacksmiths immediately take the freshly cut metal and hammer it down to construct sturdy support frames for the tunnel walls. However, step 5 brings a harsh reality check for Xavier, who begins to question why a proud knight like him is relegated to cutting up a giant snake's metallic waste. Ignoring any complaints, a highly motivated Lloyd rallies the crew, shouting for everyone to keep pushing forward. With the support structure secured, they roll the massive wooden shield machine forward to dig even deeper. Despite their progress, the grueling environment takes a toll on Lloyd, who realizes they would have passed out from lack of oxygen if not for their ventilation pipe. Seeing his master struggling, Xavier suggests that Lloyd should head outside and take a much-needed rest like the rest of the crew. But Lloyd stubbornly refuses, reminding Xavier that as the person in charge, it is his duty to oversee every single detail of the operation. He silently recalls how managers back in Korea would only talk big or not even show up to the job site. Swearing to never become like those lazy bosses, Lloyd resolves to stay on the front lines until the job is done. Suddenly, Lloyd's eyes flash with a brilliant green light as his surveying skills pick up something unexpected. Through his magical vision, he spots a massive deposit of premium bituminous coal directly ahead of them. Thrilled by the discovery, Lloyd rallies the exhausted workers, cheering that they are almost at the finish line. Lloyd warmly thanks a tiny, exhausted Belle, praising her for helping them finish the excavation 10 times faster than normal. He then instructs the team that once they reach the coal seam, they will dismantle the shield machine to expand their mining space. He warns them to keep their guard up during this highly dangerous phase, just as a heavy thud echoes through the cavern. Lloyd stops speaking and slowly turns around to face the sealed steel shield door. Another violent thud reverberates from the other side, sending a wave of tension through the entire tunnel. Lloyd is left completely bewildered, knowing that the surrounding bedrock is far too stable to collapse on its own. Activating his underground scan skill, Lloyd's eyes lock in like crosshairs as he analyzes the terrain beneath them. His visual interface displays the subterranean layout, revealing an unexpected opening that wasn't present before. Zooming in on the anomaly, mystery question marks clutter the screen as the strange breach suddenly expands. Before anyone can react, a massive, red-eyed giant ant bursts into the tunnel, sending the workers tumbling back in terror. The monstrous insect's razor-sharp leg comes crashing down, nearly crushing Lloyd as he scrambles out of the way with his shovel. Taking a quick combat stance, Xavier draws his blade, his eyes narrowing with deadly focus. Standing toe-to-toe against the terrifying beast, Xavier prepares to face off against its massive scythe-like mandibles. Refusing to back down, Lloyd raises his trusty shovel high into the air with a ferocious battle cry. With everything he's got, Lloyd swings the shovel down, driving it straight into the giant ant's armored head. The heavy blow splits the creature's skull open, killing it instantly on the floor as blue blood splatters everywhere. Breathing heavily, Lloyd wipes his brow, completely thrown off since this monster was never mentioned in the original novel. However, as he stares at the corpse, a sudden wave of dread washes over him as he realizes something far worse. Peering into the dark breach behind the fallen ant, his heart drops when dozens of glowing red eyes stare right back at him. Dozens of giant killer ants begin crawling out of the pitch-black cavern, ready to swarm the mine. Panicking, Lloyd screams at the terrified miners to evacuate immediately as the horde pours into the shaft. Stepping up as the shield, Xavier unleashes a flurry of rapid sword strikes, slicing through the incoming ants. Watching the endless wave, Lloyd realizes hundreds or even thousands could invade, threatening to wipe out the entire estate. Seeing Xavier strain in the low-oxygen environment, Lloyd knows his knight can't hold off an entire army alone for long. He desperately looks up at the sturdy timber-supported mine shaft, knowing it won't collapse easily without explosives. Overwhelmed by the life-or-death crisis, Lloyd's mind spirals as he frantically tries to figure out a way out. Snapping him out of his panic, Xavier delivers a sharp slap across Lloyd's face, telling him to keep his composure. Lloyd comically snaps back that he isn't panicking but thinking, prompting Xavier to tell him to hurry up and find a solution. Reaching his physical limit, Xavier yells out that he can no longer hold off the overwhelming swarm. Connecting the pieces between the ant tunnels, the underground layout, and the bituminous coal, Lloyd's mind works at top speed. Suddenly, a brilliant lightbulb moment hits him, triggering a high IQ strategy to wipe out the whole colony. Lloyd's eyes light up as the missing piece of the puzzle snaps into place, realizing the solution to their desperate situation. Grabbing a burning torch, Lloyd yells out to Xavier to prepare for an immediate change in plans. Lloyd announces that instead of retreating, they are going to attack head-on and charge straight into the ant tunnels. Though diving into a swarm of giant monster ants sounds completely suicidal, Xavier trusts Lloyd's judgment without question. Slashing through waves of aggressive insects, Xavier holds firm to his belief that Lloyd must have a genius motive behind this madness. Lloyd shouts encouragement from right behind him, pushing Xavier to carve a path deeper into the dark underground hive. Meanwhile, back at the estate, a frantic messenger bursts in to deliver dire news to the Baron. The Baron pales in horror upon hearing about the giant ant outbreak and frantically demands to know where Lloyd is. The messenger explains that while the mine workers were evacuated, Lloyd and Xavier remain trapped inside as Bayern moves to seal off the entrance. Refusing to abandon his son to die in the collapse, the Baron quickly straps on his battle armor and mobilizes a rescue force. Deep inside the cavern, Xavier relentlessly cleaves through hordes of giant ants with his sword. Exhausted and heavily outnumbered, Xavier yells back to ask how much further into the deadly nest they need to push. Scanning the cave walls, Lloyd tells him to shut up and keep fighting while he concentrates on finding their target. Although the surface remains safe because the ants are staying in their burrows, being completely surrounded underground puts them in extreme danger. The intense heat and lack of oxygen in the deep tunnels rapidly drain Xavier's strength, bringing him dangerously close to his limit. Realizing time is running out, Lloyd activates his specialized system vision to scan the surrounding rock strata. He knows that somewhere buried within these bituminous coal deposits lies a concentrated pocket of highly explosive methane gas. Because coal deposits naturally house methanogenic bacteria, pockets of flammable methane gas are trapped throughout the entire underground cavern network. If he can just pinpoint a major gas pocket and ignite it with his torch, the resulting blast will wipe out the entire colony in an instant. Suddenly, Lloyd freezes in place with his eyes gleaming, catching Xavier completely off guard. His system interface pinpoints the precise location of a massive methane gas reservoir directly beneath the tunnel floor. Without wasting a single second, Lloyd drives his shovel deep into the cracked rock with all his strength. Lloyd orders Xavier to hold off the surrounding monsters while he frantically digs down to breach the gas pocket. Fueled by pure adrenaline, Lloyd digs into the earth like a man possessed to break through before they get overwhelmed. However, right as he digs, a monstrous giant ant looms directly over Lloyd, opening its terrifying jaws to strike. Just in time, Xavier steps up, swinging his sword into position with perfect technique to shield his master. With a single mighty slash, Xavier cleaves through the surrounding worker ants, giving Lloyd the freedom to shovel away without restraint. From above, Xavier spins like a whirlwind of steel, carving out a safe perimeter while Lloyd digs frantically into the earth. But before they can celebrate, a violent tremor shakes the entire cave floor, instantly freezing both men in shock. Emerging from the shadows is a monstrous, blood-red queen ant, towering over them with glowing crimson eyes. Looking up at the colossal beast, Lloyd sweats nervously, terrified by the sheer size of the colony's mother. The gargantuan queen stares down at the two tiny invaders, ready to crush them alongside her army. Panicked, Lloyd asks if Xavier can take her down, but the knight bluntly admits that some monsters are far beyond his current strength. Stealing his resolve, Xavier sharpens his gaze, knowing that despite the suicidal odds, fighting back is their only option. The queen ant lunges forward without warning, driving her razor-sharp scythe claw straight toward them. Xavier focuses his internal mana, causing a blinding sphere of condensed aura to burst at the tip of his blade. Raising his sword high overhead, he channels every drop of energy into a desperate defense. He swings upward, triggering a massive explosion of light as his blade clashes head-on against the queen's deadly claw. To the queen ant's utter disbelief, the tiny human actually halts her relentless blow in midair. Gritting his teeth under the overwhelming weight, Xavier strains every muscle to keep the colossal claw from crushing him. With a furious battle cry, he exerts all his strength and deflects the massive strike away. Seeing Xavier pull off the impossible, Lloyd shovels the dirt with desperate speed to make every second count. Xavier becomes a blur of motion, executing a multi-blade sword technique to block a relentless barrage of attacks from the monster. Suddenly, Lloyd's shovel breaks through into an open pocket, causing his eyes to light up with excitement. Grabbing a flaming torch, Lloyd screams at Xavier to abandon the fight and sprint toward the escape route. The duo turns on their heels and flees at full speed, with the massive queen ant raging right on their tails. Ahead of them lies the tight, narrow tunnel they had previously navigated, the perfect bottleneck to stop a giant insect. They dive straight toward the dark opening, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. Reaching the entrance first, Lloyd turns around with a fierce glare, swinging his burning torch backward. He hurls the fire straight into the path of the incoming swarms, aiming to block the tunnel and buy them an escape. The massive monster ant slams onto the tunnel floor with a heavy thud, its glowing pink eyes staring down the path. Lloyd's thrown torch clatters against the ground, burning brightly right in front of the advancing ant swarm. Suddenly, a giant beast swoops straight down toward Lloyd and Xavier, catching them off guard as they scramble on the floor. A powerful blast ignites with a blinding flash, tearing through the darkness of the cavern. A fiery vortex sweeps through the passageway, engulfing the giant ants in a raging inferno. The intense fire triggers a massive explosion, blasting rock fragments and debris everywhere. Xavier throws himself over Lloyd to shield him as rocks collapse around them, with the giant monster's body taking the brunt of the cave-in. Back inside the tunnel, the ant swarm stops in its tracks, completely cut off by the blazing rock slide blocking the way. The violent explosion subsides, leaving behind a thick cloud of dust, smoke, and heat inside the sealed chamber. As the dust settles, Lloyd lies beneath Xavier, who shielded him with his bare body through the brutal blast. Outside the collapse, the surrounding guards lower their swords, staring anxiously into the pitch-black shaft. Unable to contain his panic, someone shouts out Lloyd's name, but is forcefully held back from rushing into the dangerous collapse. Deep under the rubble, Xavier lies unconscious on top of Lloyd, alongside the fainted pet Belle and their discarded shovel. Slowly regaining consciousness, Lloyd groans in pain, clutching his throbbing ear from the deafening blast. Looking over at the charred shell of the giant beast blocking the passage, he realizes his desperate trap actually worked. He turns to see Xavier lying motionless beside him and realizes the knight risked his life to shield him from the explosion. Gently picking up the unconscious Belle, Lloyd whispers an apology for putting the poor creature in such grave danger. But his expression quickly stiffens as another dire threat dawns on him. Seeing the exit completely buried under tons of heavy boulders, he realizes they are trapped inside with no way out. Suddenly, a wave of intense dizziness strikes him, making his head throb as he staggers against his shovel. A blue system warning pops up before his eyes, alerting him to a critical lack of oxygen in the sealed cavern. Acknowledging the fatal situation with glowing green eyes, Lloyd grits his teeth, knowing time is rapidly running out. Analyzing the obstruction through his interface, he calculates that he must dig through over 5 meters of solid earth to reach air. The system chime rings relentlessly as the oxygen meter drops into the dangerous red zone. With no other options left, Lloyd thrusts his shovel deep into the dirt, desperately digging for their very survival. Lying exhausted on the cold ground, Xavier weakly opens his eyes as Lloyd's desperate cries echo through the cave. Lloyd drives his shovel into the earth with relentless force, shouting that they are going to make it out alive together. Refusing to abandon anyone, Lloyd screams through his effort, declaring that both Xavier and Belle belong to his territory. Overwhelmed by Lloyd's unyielding loyalty, Xavier lies quietly in the dust, deeply moved by his master's refusal to give up. Suddenly, a bright blue system alert pops up, admiring Lloyd's sheer tenacity for protecting his knight. The system announces that Xavier's favorability toward him has jumped, granting Lloyd a massive reward of 108 RP. With his recent achievement, Lloyd's total pool of reward points climbs all the way up to 157. Covered in sweat and dirt, Lloyd gasps heavily for air, knowing that their time beneath the debris is rapidly running out. As the system's oxygen meter flashes a dire red warning, Lloyd resolves to bet everything he has left on one final gamble. The alarm continues to chime relentlessly, signaling that the remaining air supply is on the verge of complete depletion. Determined to find a breakthrough, Lloyd shouts directly at the system window to search his memory for trainable skills. The interface instantly responds, initializing a deep scan of Lloyd's existing knowledge and experiences. A ring of light sweeps over Lloyd's body, analyzing his physical potential and subconscious martial understanding. Several system notices flash rapidly, detecting his foundational concepts regarding surrounding mana absorption. The system informs him that combining these scattered insights will allow him to learn the coveted Azrahan core technique. Lloyd smirks with renewed confidence, remembering how tirelessly he practiced his mana flow after his duel with Newman. Without a moment of hesitation, he presses the confirm button to purchase the Azrahan core technique for 15 RP. An explosive burst of blue aura surges around Lloyd as he successfully acquires the level 5 single circle core. Deep inside his spirit, a single brilliant speck of mana sparks into existence amid the darkness. The luminous energy swerves smoothly, tracing a glowing path through his body. Although he lacks a true mana heart, Lloyd feels the newly formed mana circle spinning vibrantly in his chest. A system window pops up immediately, confirming that his mana amplification rate has spiked to 120%. Lloyd realizes that while ordinary humans require years of uncertain effort to grow, his unique advantage changes everything. Looking at his massive reserve of RP, he smiles as he prepares to power up his new core technique instantly. Slap-tapping the level up button over and over, Lloyd pours all his points into strengthening his core to break them out. Energy swirls around Lloyd as his Azrahan core technique reaches single circle level 6. The system confirms his mana amplification has boosted to 125%. Noticing the RP requirement increases by 5 points per level, he doesn't hesitate to upgrade to single circle level 7. Despite worrying about burning through his points, he knows survival comes first and spams the level up button all the way to level 10. Upon maxing out the single circle technique, a bright system notification flashes before his eyes. Inside his mana core, 2 distinct aura circles collide and intertwine, triggering a massive breakthrough. He successfully unlocks double circle level 1, instantly boosting his mana amplification to 200%. Checking his status, he sees the next level demands a massive 100 RP, leaving him with a paltry 7 points. Sweating profusely, he wonders what brand new abilities come with reaching the double circle realm. The system presents 2 powerful option skills: Energizer for infinite stamina, and Power Outburst to triple his mana. Gripping his shovel handle with intense focus, Lloyd prepares to execute his desperate plan. He immediately activates Energizer, causing a surge of crackling lightning energy to cover his shovel. With 10 minutes of untiring stamina coursing through his muscles, he holds the shovel high, ready to strike. Unleashing a hyperspeed barrage of shoveling, he moves like a frenzy, carving through solid rock at ridiculous speeds. Meanwhile, his oxygen meter drops dangerously into the red zone, flashing a critical alarm. Clenching his teeth in pure desperation, he prays to spot any open cavity ahead. He activates his spatial vision, desperately scanning for even the smallest air pocket beyond the dirt wall. Sparks fly with every swing as he furiously digs deeper into the cave wall. His shovel becomes a blurred motion, clearing massive amounts of dirt in mere seconds. The oxygen gauge hits 0, sounding off a deadly warning that his air has completely run out. Suddenly, something in his visual interface catches his attention, stopping him in his tracks. Through the green HUD, he spots a small opening right through the remaining thin layer of rock. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he channels every drop of remaining energy into a final push. On the other side of the rock wall, an unconscious Javier lies motionless alongside his exhausted creature. Panting heavily with bloodshot eyes, Lloyd breaks through the final barrier, reaching his fallen companion just in time. The system's oxygen meter ticks down rapidly, sounding a dire alarm. Screaming through the agony, Lloyd digs into the solid rock with everything he has left. With every passing second, the air supply dwindles down to its absolute limit. The spatial interface reveals 3 meters of thick stone still blocking their escape. Suddenly, Lloyd's legs give out beneath him and he crashes heavily onto his knees. His shovel slips from his trembling fingers, clattering uselessly against the stone cavern floor. A system notification pops up to announce that his 10-minute Energizer skill has officially expired. Stripped of his buff, Lloyd sits defeated in the tunnel, while Javier lies motionless nearby. Refusing to give up on his friend, Lloyd immediately activates his power outburst skill. Gritting his teeth with pure rage and determination, he snatches up the shovel once again. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he violently hacks away at the rock face with renewed fury. With 30 centimeters remaining, the system warns him that he only has 20 seconds of air left. Cruelly, the oxygen meter drains completely to zero. In the quiet shaft behind him, Javier lies still without a single breath of air. His body utterly spent, Lloyd collapses onto his back next to his fallen shovel. Staring into the dark, he bitterly laments how tragically short his second life turned out to be. He thinks back on how he transmigrated as a noble son in a quiet region. All he ever really wanted was to live a cozy, comfortable life without any danger. Silence descends upon the underground chamber as Lloyd lies completely motionless. Suddenly, a subtle crumbling sound breaks the heavy silence. Lloyd slowly cracks an eye open, catching the faint noise echoing nearby. A small section of the rock wall behind him begins to disintegrate and give way. To his shock, Padong bursts right through the broken wall with a joyful squeak. Lloyd's eyes widen with intense disbelief and sudden hope. As sweet, fresh air floods into the cavern, Lloyd shouts in pure relief that oxygen has finally arrived. Driven by the dream of a comfortable, noble life, Lloyd pushes through his extreme physical exhaustion and digs furiously with his shovel. Meanwhile, a serene night falls over the tranquil barony beneath the glowing full moon. Deep inside the dark cave, a bright torch flickers against the rough stone walls. Assessing the danger, the knight in armor tells his men to fall back while he resolves to venture deeper into the tunnel alone. Suddenly, the knight catches sight of something unexpected emerging from the dark passage ahead. Slow, weary footsteps echo through the corridor as a solitary figure hobbles into view carrying a body. It is a battered Lloyd carrying the unconscious Javier on his back. As a system window reveals, he broke his physical limits through sheer willpower. The message notes that his intense mastery of the Azrahan core technique significantly helped him endure the ordeal. A new skill option, Power Mode, unlocks, granting him residual power even when completely depleted of energy. Recognizing the young master, the knight shouts Lloyd's name in utter shock and rushes forward. Having finally brought Javier to safety, Lloyd's legs give out as he collapses from complete exhaustion. The knight catches both collapsed young men, shouting frantically for help as he cradles them. As the night settles over the realm, the full moon hangs quietly in the starry sky. Morning dawns across the valley, illuminating the vibrant estate in warm sunlight. Throughout the domain, conversations begin to spark regarding the young master's astonishing deeds. While moving crates, townspeople discuss how Lloyd completely defied their expectations of being a lazy parasite. A man reveals his nephew witnessed Lloyd immediately prioritize rescuing the workers when the monster ants invaded. Overlooking the bustling streets, locals marvel at how Lloyd stayed behind with Sir Javier to eradicate the entire nest. The townsfolk agree that the young master has truly changed into a respectable and heroic leader. Inside the mansion, Lloyd rests peacefully in bed, while a fully recovered Javier keeps silent vigil by his side. Lloyd slumbers deeply, his face calm after enduring the grueling rescue effort. Slowly, his eyelids flutter as he begins to stir back to consciousness. Noticing the subtle movement, Javier turns his head silently to check on the young master. A blue system notification pops up, informing Lloyd that the entire barony is overflowing with praise for his heroic bravery. Opening his eyes, Lloyd blinks in total confusion at the upside-down system message floating right before his face. A new blue system message announces that a massive amount of RP will be rewarded as a bonus for his heroic achievement. Right before his eyes, his current RP instantly skyrockets from a miserable 7 points all the way to 507. Lying flat on his bed, Lloyd stares up blankly in complete disbelief at the sudden point windfall. It slowly begins to sink in that, in the eyes of the populace, he has officially been branded a grand hero. A cheeky, greedy smirk spreads across his face as he gleefully celebrates his massive haul of reward points. Meanwhile, out at the estate's coal mine, A newly paved stone pathway leads straight into the reinforced tunnel entrance. Deep inside, teams of workers are hard at work hammering timber supports and wheeling out carts full of rocks. Suddenly, the miners halt their tools in surprise as footsteps echo down the wooden-lined shaft. Dressed in simple work clothes with a shovel slung over his shoulder, Lloyd walks in side by side with Javier to enthusiastic cheers. The workers bow respectfully and shout warm greetings, leaving a sweaty Lloyd flustered as he stammers back a reply. With starry, hero-worshipping eyes, the men praise Lloyd as a true noble who fights alongside commoners and embodies genuine noblesse oblige. Sweating profusely under their overwhelming admiration, Lloyd forces a nervous smile, feeling insanely pressured by their expectations. 2 weeks have already passed since the monster ant crisis, and operations within the coal mine continue to progress smoothly. While on the surface everything appears peaceful, hidden hazards could still be lurking beneath the stone. Determined to avoid any future collapse, Lloyd personally inspects the dangerous cave walls with a torch in hand. As they trek through the dim tunnels searching for ant burrows, Lloyd sternly reminds Javier to keep talking to a minimum to conserve limited oxygen. Javier curiously asks why the young master insists on doing such risky inspection work himself instead of ordering the laborers to do it. Wondering if Lloyd is secretly worried for the workers' safety, Javier begins to advise him that as the estate's heir, he shouldn't take unnecessary risks. Before he can finish his sentence, Lloyd sharply turns back and yells at Javier, calling him an absolute idiot. Marching forward into the dark shaft, Lloyd dramatically claims that he must be the one responsible for the dangerous work. Hearing these seemingly selfless words, Javier stares at him in breathless awe, misjudging his master's noble character once again. However, Lloyd turns around with an evil smirk, revealing he only takes the dangerous jobs so no one can complain when he spends outrageous amounts of money later. A system alert immediately pops up revealing Javier's rising favorability instantly froze, leaving the baffled knight questioning whether to respect him or not. Reaching a solid rock face, Lloyd assumes they've hit a dead end and suggests searching elsewhere, but Javier suddenly stops him. Lloyd's eyes light up with intense focus as Javier inspects the cavern wall, sensing that the stone structure is completely hollow on the other side. Lloyd eagerly digs through the cavern wall with his shovel, asking Javier if they should investigate further before any trapped ant eggs hatch. Breaking open a path into the dark space, Lloyd pokes his torch inside and gasps in utter bewilderment. Bound tightly in thick spider-like silk hanging from the ceiling is an extraordinarily handsome, chiseled green-skinned orc with long dark hair. Directly beneath the suspended orc lies a giant wild pig wrapped up in the exact same web, preserved as food for the colony. Standing side by side in the cavern, Lloyd and Javier shine their torches on the absurdly well-bound specimens suspended before them. Judging the creature to be a threat, Javier prepares to draw his sword, but Lloyd quickly holds him back and calls his knight surprisingly reckless. Lloyd squints at the prisoner and asks what on earth it is, completely in denial because no ordinary orc looks like a male model. When Javier asks if the creature is dead, Lloyd explains that monster ants paralyze their prey to store them alive for later consumption. Upon realizing the paralyzed orc is still alive and ripe for saving, a sly, mischievous grin spreads across Lloyd's face. Unable to control his greed, Lloyd erupts into an evil schemer's face, declaring this unexpected discovery to be a massive jackpot. The story moves to the bright, luxurious estate, where the rescued creature has been brought to recover. Sitting up on a plush bed, the surprisingly gorgeous orc introduces himself as Hirosh and swears eternal loyalty to his savior Lloyd, ending his sentence with a weird vocal tick. Lloyd points a finger at him and asks if he's adding keek to his sentences on purpose to force a character archetype, which Hirosh utterly denies. A narrative text box confirms that Hirosh is actually the son of an orc tribe leader who has fully recovered thanks to medical treatment. Hirosh places his fist against his chest and boldly promises to grant Lloyd anything his heart desires in exchange for his life. Lloyd's eyes turn into absolute money signs as he gasps in fake delight, revealing this exact reward was his master plan all along. Leaning in close with an insidiously friendly aura, Lloyd gets ready to lay down his demand. With a sweet, innocent smile, Lloyd casually requests Hirosh to round up 120 orcs to work as hard labor in his mine. Without missing a beat, Hirosh shuts him down with a stern and definitive refusal. Lloyd's friendly mask instantly crumbles into a horrifying face of pure disappointment as he loudly clicks his tongue in annoyance. Scrambling to recover, Lloyd quickly plasters on a fake laugh, but Hirosh calls him out for clicking his tongue like a complete villain. Hirosh firmly explains that orcs are proud warriors who will only ever follow the absolute commands of a chief warrior. Crossing his arms thoughtfully, Lloyd realizes he has hit a massive roadblock since an ordinary noble like him holds zero authority over orc warriors. A visual flashback illustrates how young wild orcs must hunt and present the severed head of a monster ant to earn their adult warrior status, revealing that Hirosh had mistakenly charged into the ant nest alone for his rite of passage, only to end up paralyzed instead. Hearing Hirosh's tragic tale, Lloyd pauses with a serious look on his face, contemplating his next move. He licks his lips schemingly, preparing to spin the narrative entirely to his advantage. Putting on a bright smile, Lloyd claps his hands cheerfully and congratulates Hirosh on officially becoming an adult. However, Hirosh looks down gloomily, insisting that he failed his rite of passage after getting paralyzed before killing any monster ant. Lloyd immediately reframes the story, enthusiastically insisting that they technically hunted and defeated the giant monster ant together. Hirosh breaks into a cold sweat, genuinely unable to recall ever fighting a monster ant of that massive size. Leaning in close, Lloyd dramatically claims that when he entered the tunnel, even the queen ant was trembling in fear. He fabricates a wild tale that the queen ant wept over losing to a young orc warrior, casually assuring a bewildered Hirosh that ants speak fluent human language. Lloyd insists that Hirosh did all the heavy lifting, while Javier stands in the background looking utterly speechless at Lloyd's shameless gaslighting. Placing a comforting hand on Hirosh's shoulder, Lloyd gets ready to deliver his grand conclusion. He whispers softly into the young orc's ear, making him feel like a legendary hero. Bathed in a heroic glow, Lloyd warmly reassures him that together, they conquered the nest as a team. Lloyd throws his hands up cheerfully, declaring Hirosh an officially certified, excellent warrior. Hirosh is deeply touched by the recognition, repeating the phrase excellent warrior with starry eyes. Striking while the iron is hot, Lloyd immediately pivots back to business and casually asks about the 120 workers. Fired up with newly restored warrior pride, Hirosh passionately roars that he will gladly lend him all the workers. 1 week later, the story transitions across a dramatic mountain landscape. After a long and grueling trek through the wilderness, the group finally arrives at the formidable village of the Steel Sand Orc tribe. They completed the arduous journey to gather their promised labor force, but an unexpected hurdle awaited them. Sitting tall upon his throne, Chief Akush bluntly rejects the request, apologizing that he cannot grant the favor. Lloyd panics internally, shocked and sweating as he wonders why the chief suddenly changed his mind after all his effort. Holding back his distress, Lloyd bows respectfully with a hand on his chest and asks Chief Akush for the reason behind his refusal. Flexing his massive chest, the chief explains that his warriors must continuously hunt and consume vast amounts of meat to maintain their muscle strength. He warns that losing muscle power would lead to the tribe's downfall, leading a curious Lloyd to pause when he hears that they go out hunting every single day. The chief continues explaining that failing to consume meat immediately after a hunt will cause them to lose muscle, leaving Lloyd internally exasperated by his endless obsession with gains. Javier chimes in, observing that protein and muscles are everything to these orcs, suggesting it might be wiser to just give up on hiring them. Refusing to abandon the idea so easily, Lloyd thoughtfully rests his chin on his hand as a plan forms. He turns to the chief and proposes a deal. If he can keep their meat fresh for days, they won't need to hunt continuously and can lend him workers. The chief admits they would love to return the favor, but stresses that maintaining their tribe's muscle strength must come first. Looking up at Lloyd in surprise, the chief asks if preserving meat for days is truly possible. Lloyd flashes a confident smirk, asking if the chief will hand over the workers as long as he prevents the meat from rotting. To justify his determination, Lloyd thinks back to when they first arrived at the village and saw the orcs' absurd physical power. He vividly recalls the chief's son crying out emotionally for his father upon returning to the tribe. The chief had roared back his son's name, tears welling in his eyes during their dramatic reunion. The two muscular behemoths had charged toward each other at full power across the village grounds. Leaping into the air with terrifying momentum, they braced for an intense embrace. The ground shook beneath them as Lloyd and his crew watched the sheer force of their approach in utter terror. Their emotional embrace slammed together with enough impact force to rival a destructive battle. A massive shockwave erupted into the sky from what was supposed to be a simple father-son hug. Lloyd had realized back then that standing between those two monsters during a hug would have ground him into fine dust. Flashing a devious grin, Lloyd knew that securing 120 of these monstrously strong workers would boost his project's productivity 100-fold. However, that wasn't the only eye-opening detail Lloyd had noticed during their arrival. An orc warrior had proudly hoisted the gigantic severed head of an ant queen high above his shoulders. Overjoyed by the hunt, the chief raised his fist in celebration, declaring a feast to honor his son's victory. To Lloyd's disbelief, the orc's idea of celebrating was doing squat reps using golden chandeliers, treasure chests, and giant statues as weights. Lloyd had stared in absolute stunned silence at the absurd workout scene unfolding before him. The orcs were casually bench-pressing priceless solid gold artifacts just to get a good muscle pump. Horrified by the sheer waste, Lloyd had screamed in comedic fury over them treating expensive treasures like cheap gym equipment. It was obvious these luxury items had been scavenged or looted, sitting around completely unappreciated by the muscle-brain tribe. Lloyd knew these luxury items were far too valuable to be wasted as crude gym gear. He smirks deviously, explaining how he signed a contract with the tribe leader to secure both their labor and these hidden treasures. Breaking down the deal to Xavier, Lloyd reveals they will construct a stone-cold storage facility in exchange for the priceless artifacts. Xavier squints at the plans in total confusion, having never heard of a stone-cold storage building before. Lloyd reminds him that while royal families rely on expensive ice magic wizards to preserve their food, there is another way. He proudly explains that a cold storage facility replicates that exact refrigeration effect using pure engineering rather than magic. When Xavier questions where he learned such advanced concepts, Lloyd lazily deflects instead of explaining modern engineering. Shifting focus to the massive rock face behind them, Lloyd points out that they need dense, highly durable granite for the build. Xavier warns that harvesting such hard rock will be extremely difficult, which Lloyd readily admits. With a scheming look, Lloyd notes that while they lack dynamite, he already has a perfect substitute right in front of him. He slowly turns his head toward Xavier with a terrifyingly cheerful expression. Grinning like a villain, Lloyd declares Xavier to be his personal human dynamite, leaving the knight groaning in dread. Lloyd recalls a legendary chapter from the original novel, Blood and Iron's Knight, detailing Xavier's ultimate power. In the story, the city of Namrim was completely enveloped in a deadly, oppressive magical barrier. Trapped inside were thousands of refugees having their vital mana ruthlessly drained away by the spell. Even as a fourth circle swordmaster, Xavier was helpless to stop the drain through standard combat techniques. Driven by desperate resolve, Xavier decided to stake his very life to break the impenetrable wall. That extreme desperation forced him to invent an insanely dangerous lethal technique on the fly. He used one of his mana circles to shield his mana heart from total destruction, while deliberately forcing his remaining 3 mana circles onto a catastrophic collision course. The resulting internal collapse created a violent explosion of raw, uncompressed mana inside his body. Channeling that apocalyptic pressure into his blade, Xavier plunged down with furious velocity. Upon impact, the concentrated magic detonated with tremendous sound and fury. A towering column of destructive flames erupted into the sky, tearing through space itself. The monstrous beam pierced straight through the magical barrier, completely shattering the siege. This explosive blast would later become the signature technique representing the Knight of Iron and Blood alongside the Azrahan Mine technique. Lloyd, wearing a silly mask, enthusiastically suggests whether they can simply apply that very same concept here. Javier suspiciously questions how Lloyd could possibly know such a technique, but Lloyd cheekily tells him to look into his eyes and judge if he's lying. Javier bluntly responds that those exact eyes are annoying and clearly full of lies, leaving Lloyd feigning shock. Lloyd playfully roots for Javier's swordsmanship to evolve, though Javier calls him out for just wanting to make his own work easier. Realizing it could indeed benefit his own growth, Javier settles down to attempt it, while Lloyd stands over him grinning maliciously. Javier assumes a focused stance against the cliff wall, mentally channeling his energy by shifting 3 mana circles, while safeguarding his mana heart with the 4th. With a fierce shout, Javier thrusts his sword directly into the cliffside, unleashing a concentrated shockwave of mana. Blinding rays of radiant light erupt instantly from the strike point, shattering the rock face with incredible power. A fierce blast wave blows Lloyd backward, leaving him completely flabbergasted that Javier actually succeeded on his very first try. Through the thick swirling dust, an imposing muscular silhouette slowly steps forward. Javier emerges from the haze with his shirt completely blown off, looking battle-worn yet effortlessly heroic. Javier demands to know if Lloyd foresaw his clothes being shredded, prompting Lloyd to hastily apologize and claim total innocence. Sighing in relief, Javier admits the unconventional idea actually worked, before turning to remind Lloyd that it's now his turn to get to work. System windows pop up notifying Lloyd that Javier is secretly thankful for the guidance, slightly raising his favorable impression score. Furthermore, Lloyd receives 54 reward points for improving his relationship, bringing his total RP pool up to 561. Javier grumbles that a knight's swordsmanship was intended to protect the Lord, yet he is constantly reduced to using his master techniques for glorified construction labor. Lloyd smugly brushes off Javier's discontent, jokingly telling him there's no need to shower him with so much gratitude. Enraged by Lloyd's shameless spin, Javier shouts back that he isn't feeling thankful in the slightest. Despite the arguments, the newly unlocked technique accelerates the entire construction effort dramatically. As Javier effortlessly slashes and trims massive granite slabs, the giant creature Padong readily carries them away under Lloyd's energetic commands. Meanwhile, on the site, an orc scolds a human worker for bad lifting posture, pushing him aside to demonstrate proper heavy lifting form. Being absolute fitness enthusiasts, the orcs treat the manual labor as an intense workout session, eagerly moving heavy materials without even being asked. As the orc flexes and roars with enthusiasm, Lloyd happily calculates that their unexpected gains will finish the project 5 times faster than planned. Cooling himself off, Lloyd begins pondering the final remaining steps for the build, securing enough ice and proper insulation. Lloyd brings up the 5 soldiers he sent off to collect insulation materials, asking Xavier if it hasn't been a while, to which the knight notes that exactly 3 weeks have passed. Realizing the timeline, Lloyd begins to worry that the men should have already returned by now. Xavier breaks down the situation into 2 possibilities. Either the soldiers got lazy, or they met with a terrible accident, causing Lloyd's expression to turn serious. Xavier prepares to investigate the area, while Lloyd grabs his shovel to come along. However, Xavier immediately reaches out his arm to stop the young lord in his tracks. The knight argues that if danger lies ahead, he should go alone, as taking Lloyd along would be far too risky. Unfazed, Lloyd turns to Xavier and reminds him of the agreement they've discussed countless times before. He firmly asserts that as the head of construction, he bears full responsibility for every worker under his command. Accepting Lloyd's stubborn sense of duty, Xavier closes his eyes and quietly yields. With both men now in agreement, they set off together on their rescue mission. They trek deep into the dry, rocky canyon terrain under the open sky. Before long, they spot a blood-stained glove lying discarded on the dirt path alongside scattered straw. Lloyd kneels down and picks it up, instantly recognizing it as one of the special insulation gloves he custom-made for his team. As Lloyd examines the clue, Xavier speaks up to grab his attention. Standing near the cliffside, Xavier points toward the deep canyon and notes that something feels off. He explains that there is a subtle, unusual flow of mana lingering in the area, catching Lloyd off guard. Pondering the strange mana anomaly, Lloyd suddenly recalls a specific event from the original novel, Iron and Blood's Night. His eyes widen in sheer horror as the terrifying realization hits him. Without missing a beat, Lloyd shouts at Xavier to hurry, breaking into a desperate sprint while Xavier asks what he realized. Panicking, Lloyd yells back that all of their soldiers might already be dead. Xavier's eyes widen in complete shock as he hears Lloyd's terrifying warning. Ahead of them lies the vast and treacherous canyon, cutting deeply through the landscape. On the ground near their boots, bits of broken straw lie scattered across the dirt path. Lloyd crouches down to inspect the trail of straw in silence, while Xavier stands beside him, bracing for whatever danger lies ahead. Lloyd stands up with a handful of crushed straw in his grip, his eyes focused on the path ahead, while Xavier waits beside him. They arrive right at the entrance of Rufalin's dungeon, a gaping, pitch-black cave carved into the face of a massive cliff. Lloyd remembers that in the original novel, this very location served as the hidden lair of the dark mage Rufalin, whom Xavier had targeted early on. What truly infuriated Lloyd, however, was the dark mage's audacity to harm their estate's precious soldiers. With a downright terrifying glare, Lloyd fumes with anger, treating the mage's actions as an unforgivable violation of his private property rights. Unaware of the danger, Xavier steps forward and tells his master to follow, while Lloyd shouts out for him to stop. The moment Xavier's boot touches the ground, a hidden reddish magic circle activates beneath his feet. Acting on pure instinct, Lloyd grabs Xavier by the collar and violently pulls him backward away from the circle. A massive fiery explosion erupts in the exact spot Xavier was about to tread, blasting rock and debris into the air. As the smoke clears near the entrance, Xavier stares at the scorched earth in disbelief, realizing he almost walked into a deadly magic trap. Lloyd immediately scolds him with a wild face, berating the knight for recklessly walking into an enemy's lair without expecting traps. In the original timeline, Xavier had taken the full force of this blast and was forced to explore the dungeon while severely injured. In the novel, despite his bleeding wounds and battered body, Xavier had pushed through the pain without hesitation. He was the kind of legendary protagonist who would never fall for the same trick twice once he understood his enemy. Bringing Xavier back to reality, Lloyd reminds him of his ability to feel mana fluctuations and orders him to use that technique now. Xavier begins focusing his mind, knowing that atmospheric mana normally maintains a steady, uniform concentration. By paying attention to the air around them, one can easily detect where magical traps have been laid. Any spot with an unnaturally dense cluster of mana marks the exact location of a hidden spell ring. Realizing how simple the logic is, Xavier glances over with newfound clarity. Shovel resting on his shoulder, Lloyd smugly leads the way while praising Xavier's sharp senses. Following closely behind, Xavier stares at Lloyd in shock, realizing that his master actually knew what he was doing for once. He wonders how Lloyd Frontera could possibly foresee every danger and know exactly what lay ahead with such absolute certainty. Xavier ponders if Lloyd possesses some hidden, immense reserve of mana that allows him to sense traps without showing any outward aura. Shaking off his doubts for the moment, Xavier decides to put his questions aside and focus on the immediate objective. Together, they press forward into the shadowy depths of the cave, determined to rescue their captured soldiers as fast as possible. Deep within a hidden chamber of the cave, a dark-robed cultist studying an ancient grimoire is suddenly startled by a warning light. He quickly turns his head, his glowing crimson eyes narrowing as he senses an intruder encroaching on his lair. Realizing his perimeter defense traps have been triggered, he ponders whether someone has come to rescue his recently kidnapped prisoners. Certain that rescuers have arrived, he forcefully snaps his leather-bound spellbook shut. He turns away from his workbench and strides purposefully toward the locked door at the back of the room. Sliding back the heavy metal bolt with a sharp click, he prepares to execute the final stage of his dark experiment. Inside the gloomy cell, several bound and battered captives huddle in terror against the stone wall. Ignoring the helpless victim's desperate pleas for mercy, the cultist callously drags one of the tied-up men across the floor. He violently hurls the hostage onto a glowing demonic magic circle painted in fresh blood. Raising a terrifying golden scythe, he sinisterly recites the dark requirements needed to connect the sacrificial circle directly to hell. He positions the blood-soaked blade over the helpless victim, who gasps in sheer agony as his fate looms closer. Looking up with a psychotic gaze, the fanatical cultist gleefully declares that all conditions for his ritual are finally met. The terrified captive lets out a desperate, echoing scream as the blade prepares to strike. Before the cultist can slash down, a loud voice suddenly thunders across the chamber. Startled by the sudden intrusion, the cultist snaps his head toward the entrance in absolute shock. Xavier stands boldly at the doorway with his blade drawn, sternly commanding the evil mage to back off from the prisoner. Furious that the intruders somehow bypassed his hundreds of dangerous traps, the cultist channels dark purple energy into his palm. With a deafening rumble, a massive stone portcullis drops down from the ceiling, completely locking everyone inside. Thick dust clouds billow through the cavern as the back exit is permanently sealed shut. Undeterred by the trapped exit, Xavier and Lloyd maintain their battle stances amidst the swirling dust. Lloyd suddenly opens his mouth wide, taking in a massive, deep breath of air. He puffs up his cheeks, holding the concentrated energy within his lungs. As the smoke clears, Lloyd stands resolutely beside Xavier, wielding his trust shovel like a war hammer. Sneering villainously, the cultist plans to cast a sleep spell to render both warriors helpless before executing them. Before the dark mage can react, Lloyd unleashes his energizer skill, his eyes blazing with brilliant green light. A system message immediately pops up, declaring that Lloyd will be completely free from exhaustion for the next 10 minutes. Without wasting a single second, Lloyd furiously digs into the floor with multiple shovels, confident he can turn things around way faster than 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Xavier rubs his eyes to fight off the sleep spell, protected by his natural resistance since he never relied on insomnia medication. In mere moments, Lloyd carves out a massive underground tunnel, demonstrating his insane digging speed. Staring down into the hole, Xavier dryly compares Lloyd to a ground mole, making a mental note to tease him about this later. Popping his head out of the shaft, Lloyd urgently commands Xavier to get down into the hole with him. Xavier drops straight into the pit beside Lloyd, taking cover right beneath the surface where the cultist stands. Gathering his mana, Xavier points his sword directly straight up toward the tunnel's ceiling. He unleashes a powerful blast of aura, sending a sharp beam of energy piercing through the ground above. The attack detonates violently directly under the dark mage's feet. An explosive burst of fire knocks the cultist backward as he cries out in utter shock. Stumbling back into the dirt, the cultist stares at the flaming crater with absolute horror and confusion. As smoke rises from the deep hole created by Xavier's sword blast, silence briefly returns to the room. Suddenly, A dirt-covered hand reaches up from the darkness inside the crater. Lloyd pulls himself out of the pit, crawling onto the surface with relentless determination. Shadowing his face into a terrifying grin, Lloyd glares at the cultist and asks if this is his first time seeing a stunt like this. Shaken to his core by Lloyd's monstrous expression, the desperate cultist hurriedly channels dark magical energy into his hands. Screaming in rage, the mage slams his palms onto a massive red magic circle glowing on the floor. From the dark magic seal, a hideous, two-headed stitched flesh monster emerges with a terrifying roar. Grinning madly, the cultist boasts that despite his past failures, this beast is the strongest monster he has ever created. The gigantic two-headed golem towers over the duo as the villain brags that its steel-like hide cannot be scratched. Assessing the threat, Lloyd turns to Xavier to explain that the creature's vulnerability lies in its legs. However, before Lloyd can even finish his sentence, Xavier leaps high into the air above the massive beast. Soaring overhead, Xavier coats his sword in an intense, burning blaze of fiery mana. Preparing to unleash his cutting blast wave skill, Xavier drops down to slice the towering monster to pieces. Xavier's strike splits the massive beast cleanly in two, sending shockwaves through the cavern as the giant creature is instantly destroyed. The hooded summoner can only watch in absolute horror as his ultimate creation is obliterated in a single flash. Even Lloyd is left completely dumbfounded by the sheer, overwhelming power Xavier just displayed. He realizes that Xavier actually harnessed the explosive blast wave as a driving force to execute such a devastating cut. What shocks Lloyd the most is that this incredible technique was never even mentioned in the original novel he read. With the threat neutralized, the two stand victorious, looking incredibly badass as the dust begins to settle. Realizing he stands absolutely no chance, the terrified mage panics, convinced that his death is imminent. Lloyd casually crouches down next to the trembling summoner, snapping him out of his panic with a blunt call. Lloyd demands to know how the mage intends to compensate him for kidnapping his workers and delaying his construction project by weeks. The desperate mage immediately prostrates himself to beg for forgiveness, but Lloyd quickly cuts him off, focusing purely on the compensation. To save his own skin, the summoner frantically offers up all of his valuable magic items hidden within the cave. Hearing the word valuable, Lloyd flashes a highly devious grin, happily accepting ownership of all the treasures. Xavier returns carrying one of the kidnapped soldiers, reporting that while they are exhausted, their lives are thankfully not in danger. Lloyd notes that the soldiers would have died in a few days anyway, sternly asking the mage what his actual plans were for them. Gritting his teeth, the summoner confesses that he was conducting research on how to resurrect the dead. Lloyd reacts with skepticism, questioning if such a feat is even possible and why the mage would want to do it in the first place. The summoner falls silent for a brief moment, his expression turning somber under his hood. With a heavy heart, the man reveals his tragic motive. He wanted to bring back his deceased wife and child. Lloyd stares at him in silence, processing the heavy emotional weight of the summoner's confession. The summoner recounts his past life as a simple, happy wizard working at a lord's manor, living peacefully with his beloved family. But that warm, happy life was soon shattered by a cruel twist of fate. The corrupt lord he served suddenly tried to snatch his wife away, forcing the family to flee in desperation. As the mage explains how the lord pursued them, Lloyd abruptly cuts him off, telling him to stop his dramatic storytelling. Lloyd looks at him with cold, unyielding eyes, asking if he truly believes his family would be happy if he resurrected them this way. Lloyd harshly points out the hypocrisy, asking if he expects his resurrected family to thank him for murdering hundreds of innocent people just to bring them back. Lloyd's harsh words strike a deep nerve, leaving the necromancer completely speechless as he stammers in sheer shock. Lloyd looks back with cold indifference, asking if the lives and happiness of the families he destroyed meant absolutely nothing to him, declaring that his tragic story isn't pitiful at all. Standing alongside the rescued victims, Javier watches silently as Lloyd reminds the villain that no amount of excuses can change his rotten nature. Lloyd makes it clear that someone who ruthlessly shattered so many innocent families can only ever be classified as a cold-blooded murderer. Overwhelmed by the crushing weight of his unforgivable sins, the necromancer breaks down, tears streaming down his face. Lloyd remains completely unmoved by the villain's weeping, his expression staying firm and resolute. Casually slinging his shovel over his shoulder, Lloyd tells him that he will return later with a crew to confiscate all of his magic tools. As he begins to walk away, Lloyd delivers a final, chilling warning. If the necromancer ever tries to harm anyone again, there will be no mercy. The villain is left gasping in disbelief, stunned that he is actually being allowed to live. Falling to his knees, the broken man repeatedly bows his head to the dirt, sobbing out his desperate gratitude. As Lloyd walks away, he recalls the plot of the original novel, remembering how the protagonist Javier had handled this situation. In the original timeline, Javier's naive mercy allowed Rufalin to walk out of the dungeon alive, but that forgiveness proved to be a fatal mistake. After escaping, Rufalin went on to slaughter hundreds of innocent people, using their life force to transform himself into a grotesque, powerful monster. He became a recurring, highly troublesome villain, constantly clashing with Javier in a cycle of endless conflict. Knowing all too well how dangerous it is to spare him, Lloyd still deliberately turns his back and walks away. Left alone in the shadows, the necromancer's submissive demeanor begins to shift back into something far more sinister. A manic, blood-red glint returns to his eyes, proving that his repentance was nothing but a temporary act. He watches Lloyd's unprotected back, seeing the perfect opportunity to strike. With a crazed scream, the villain unleashes a surge of dark magic, manifesting a glowing purple spell circle in his hand. He lunges forward with a twisted, psychopathic grin, aiming his deadly spell directly at Lloyd's head. But Lloyd suddenly whips around with an absolutely terrifying expression, coldly asking if he ever said he had forgiven him. The necromancer's smug smile instantly vanishes, replaced by pure dread as he realizes he has jumped straight into a trap. Lloyd had anticipated this exact betrayal from the very beginning, knowing the villain's nature would never change. In a flash of blinding speed, Javier leaps into action, drawing his sword and executing a flawless, lethal slash. With a single, decisive strike, the necromancer's head is cleanly severed, putting a permanent end to his reign of terror. In his past life, our protagonist had to endure a miserable, power-tripping construction foreman who constantly belittled him and demanded a perfect 90-degree bow just to say hello. This toxic supervisor was the type of bully who would hurl insults and curse at his subordinates for absolutely no reason at all. Without fail, this relentless verbal abuse happened every single day, pushing the young man's patience to its absolute limit. Forcing down his pride, he would bow deeply and apologize, only to be barked at to keep his back straight like a proper servant. He tried to console himself with peaceful mantras, believing that avoiding conflict was the only way to survive and prevent things from escalating. Even as the foreman walked away grumbling about how the younger generation was useless and only knew how to eat, he chose to swallow his anger and remain silent. He naively hoped that if he just kept acting politely, the older man would eventually change his attitude, so he put up with the abuse time and time again. But instead of earning the man's respect, his submissive behavior only yielded a disastrous result. The next day, he offered an exceptionally loud and polite greeting, hoping to finally appease his tyrant of a boss. Instead of being satisfied, the foreman flew into another rage, accusing him of protesting and screaming that the loud greeting almost burst his eardrums. It became painfully clear to him that the foreman simply viewed his politeness as weakness, taking him for an easy pushover. Walking away with a sneer, the supervisor tossed one last insult over his shoulder, calling him utterly pathetic. Trembling with fury, the young man desperately tried to suppress his rising anger, chanting in his mind to just hold it in. He tried to reassure himself that this miserable shift would eventually come to an end if he could just survive a little longer. Grinding his teeth so hard they nearly shattered, he reminded himself that blowing up would only make his life harder, pleading for peace in his own mind. But then, the foreman crossed a sacred line, laughing as he insulted the young man's mother for giving birth to someone so pathetic. In that exact moment, a switch flipped inside his brain, and his eyes filled with a cold, terrifying rage. Stepping up silently behind the unsuspecting bully, he firmly gripped the foreman's shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. With all his built-up resentment fueling him, he reared back his fist, completely letting go of his self-control. He unleashed a devastating punch right into the foreman's jaw, shattering the man's arrogant composure in an instant. As the foreman shrieked in pain, the surrounding workers watched in absolute horror, completely blindsided by the sudden eruption of violence. There was no stopping him now. He followed up with a relentless barrage of heavy fists, striking the abusive supervisor over and over again. To finish the assault, he delivered a powerful kick straight to the man's chest, knocking the wind completely out of him. Even as he was dishing out this brutal beatdown, a small voice in the back of his mind warned him that his life was officially ruined. Finally, the other construction workers rushed in to pull him away, desperately trying to restrain him while the beaten bully lay groveling on the ground. So what was the ultimate consequence of his actions? Back at the construction site, He was forced to return to the grueling daily grind of manual labor, carrying heavy steel pipes under the scorching sun. But his monotonous routine was suddenly interrupted when he spotted something unexpected. It was his former bully, now reduced to carrying heavy bricks and trembling in fear at the mere sight of him. The guy who once made his life a living hell couldn't even make eye contact, completely terrified of another beating. Without saying a word, the broken bully scurried away as quickly as his legs could carry him, desperate to escape. At long last, true peace had finally returned to his workplace. He realized that while violence is generally shunned, there are moments when it is the only language a tyrant understands to make them stop. But even if peace is achieved, does that truly mean everything will turn out fine in the end? He reflects on how society often coddles vicious criminals, giving light sentences to perpetrators simply because they have a bright future. It makes him wonder if this leniency is all done under the guise of protecting human rights. To him, this is a joke, as he firmly believes that villains deserve nothing less than a punishment that fits their heinous crimes. As they move forward, a sinister presence watches them from the darkness, hinting at more trouble to come. Meanwhile, the group continues their journey deep into the rugged, sunlit mountain ranges. Navigating through the dense forest, the young master leads his weary men along the steep dirt path. One of the soldiers is clearly reaching his physical limit, gasping for air and drenched in sweat. Sensing the struggle behind him, the young master stops and turns his head to assess the situation. He directly orders the exhausted soldier to hand over his heavy pack, leaving the man completely stunned by such an unusual gesture from a noble. He tries to play it off as a matter of convenience, arguing that carrying a collapsed person would be far more troublesome. He then turns to the rest of the struggling men, demanding their heavy bags as well, leaving no room for argument. Despite their protests about how improper it is for a noble to do manual labor, he ignores them and begins tying the massive packs together. He threatens to cut the bonuses of anyone who continues to complain, effectively silencing their objections. Seeing their master take on such a massive burden just for their sake, the moved soldiers can barely hold back their tears of gratitude. Even the blue-haired companion is left completely baffled, unable to comprehend whether this is just another eccentric whim or genuine compassion. Ultimately, his true motives don't matter to the men, as his kind actions have already won their absolute loyalty. The soldiers now view Lloyd as a highly dependable and trustworthy leader worthy of their utmost devotion. This profound sense of respect is exactly what the rescued men truly feel toward the young master. Suddenly, system alerts chime in, revealing that the deeply moved soldiers will soon spread tales of his noble deed far and wide. The system even asks if he finds this heroic reputation rewarding, leaving Lloyd in a tense silence. He immediately snaps back in frustration, declaring that he has absolutely no use for emotional rewards when all he wants is cold, hard cash. The scene then shifts to a rugged canyon outpost dotted with tribal tents nestled along the rocky cliffs. They arrive at a newly constructed stone vault built directly into the hillside, designated as a cold storage unit. Inside the stone brick chamber, the muscular green orc, Hirosh, looks around skeptically at the empty room. He stares upward with a deeply disappointed and unimpressed expression on his face. Hirosh complains that it is barely cooler than the scorching outdoors, worrying that their precious meat will rot and ruin their muscles. Lloyd flashes a confident smile, reassuring the orc that the facility is simply incomplete because they haven't added the ice yet. Hirosh points out the obvious flaw, mentioning that it is far too hot in this region for any ice to naturally exist. Undeterred, Lloyd cheerfully suggests that if there is no ice available, they can simply manufacture it themselves. The bewildered orc can only stare in disbelief, wondering how on earth such a feat is even possible. Lloyd maintains his bright, unbothered smile, cryptically promising to get it done by any means necessary. Hirosh eyes him with growing suspicion, sensing that something might be highly off about this human. Lloyd simply keeps up his polite, friendly facade to ease the tension. The system reveals Hirosh's inner panic, as he begins to suspect Lloyd might be a scammer who lied about his previous achievements. A hilarious mental argument ensues between Lloyd and the system over whether he was secretly underestimating the orc's intelligence. Shaking his head vigorously, Hirosh scolds himself for doubting the man who saved his life. As he heads up the stairs, the loyal orc offers his assistance, while Lloyd waves him off to wait for the final results. Once they are alone, Javier steps forward, raising a hand to ask the million-dollar question of how they will actually produce ice. Lloyd stands frozen in place, staring blankly at the stone steps in complete silence. Beads of sweat pour down Lloyd's face as he nervously admits that he has absolutely no clue how he's going to pull this off. Javier's eyes widen in sheer horror as he realizes his master has leaped headfirst into this project without a single shred of a plan. Javier is absolutely dumbfounded, demanding to know if Lloyd really signed a contract without a plan, accusing him of trying to pull off another scam. Lloyd counters by asking Javier if he knows the true characteristics of a failure, leaving the knight completely bewildered. He explains that failures are always making excuses, constantly whining about what they can and cannot do. Lloyd urges him to stop worrying, pointing out that nothing can ever be achieved without at least trying first. With intense passion, he declares that a successful person is someone who dives in headfirst and finds a way to fix things along the way. Clenching his fist, he boldly proclaims that this chaotic process is the very definition of innovation. He raises his arm to the sky, dramatically calling it the ultimate entrepreneur mindset. Javier can only stand there in dead silence, watching his master put on a ridiculous, theatrical display. Unimpressed by the speech, Javier bluntly shuts him down, stating that this reckless approach just makes them 1,000 times more likely to fail. As night falls, the full moon rises over the desolate, rocky canyon. Sitting alone on the cliffs, Lloyd sinks deep into thought, trying to figure out his next move. He realizes that his first step must be to create a massive block of ice. To do this, he plans to have Padong and Bell pump a massive amount of water directly from the lake. He ponders the mechanics of ice magic in this world and the scientific principles that govern it. He reasons that magic is simply the act of freely manipulating and rearranging one's mana. He recalls his daily mana absorption training, knowing that nature is filled with various types of elemental mana. By tapping into these natural forces, he can manipulate different properties. He understands that altering the state of mana to create elements like fire is the very essence of magic. Lloyd grips his chin as a brilliant, slightly devious idea begins to form in his mind. A wicked smirk spreads across his face as he realizes he has a way to bypass his limitations. Though he admits he cannot use his own mana freely like a true mage, he calls out to his giant summon beasts, directing them toward the grid of stone molds he prepared. He prepares to execute a technique that can mimic the effects of high-level magic. He readies the powerful Azrahan Mind technique to begin the process. Submerging his hand into the water, he activates his mana absorption, ready to freeze the water by drawing the heat straight out of it. Lloyd reasons that by absorbing the heat energy directly, only the pure cold energy will remain in the water to freeze it. However, he accidentally does the exact opposite on his first try, realizing that controlling this technique is far more difficult than it looks. Javier watches in silence as Lloyd sits by the water troughs, clutching his arm in frustration after another failed attempt. Javier admits to himself that he initially thought Lloyd was just being reckless and trying to solve things through sheer force of will. He had assumed his master was acting irresponsibly, but his perspective begins to shift as he observes further. He sees that Lloyd is genuinely putting his all into finding a viable solution to their problem. Lloyd continues to submerge his arm, determinedly enduring the strain to proudly pave a path forward. Javier sighs and closes his eyes, admitting that he still doesn't fully understand the eccentric nobleman. Back at the water troughs, a bright blue aura begins to emanate as Lloyd successfully channels his mana. Suddenly, system alerts pop up, announcing that he has developed a new skill and leveled up his Azrahan Mind technique to double circle level 2. A few days pass by in the scorching heat of the desert canyon. Inside the cold storage, the orc leaders are left completely speechless, their jaws dropping in utter disbelief. They stare at a massive, towering cube of solid ice blocks, stammering in shock at what Lloyd has managed to create. Lloyd confidently taps the cold ice, explaining that the storage will be fully complete once they install the insulation. Overjoyed, the orcs realize they no longer have to waste their meat or go out to hunt every single day. The chief declares this a historic event worthy of a massive celebration, ordering everyone to gather around. Lloyd turns to Javier with a smug, self-satisfied grin, proud of his latest success. He boasts about his superior entrepreneur mindset, fully embracing his business-savvy nature. Javier can only shrug and silently approve of his master's ridiculous but highly effective results. Outside, the Steel Sand tribe expresses their deep gratitude to Lloyd for saving them from starvation. Lloyd casually waves it off, claiming he was simply fulfilling the terms of their contract. A system message confirms that Lloyd has officially acquired 120 strong orc workers. The chief steps forward, explaining that orcs operate differently from humans and aren't doing this just because of a piece of paper. Chief Akush states that their loyalty stems from genuine gratitude, making a solemn promise to Lloyd. He proudly declares that from this day forward, a powerful bond is forged between Lloyd's family and the Steel Sand tribe. The Steel Sand tribe proudly declares a sacred alliance with Lloyd's family, calling it a bond equivalent to a blood relationship. With a thunderous roar, the entire tribe of muscular orcs flexes in unison to seal the vow, leaving Lloyd and Javier completely speechless. Chief Akush declares that Frontera's friends and enemies are now their own, promising to rush to their aid whenever they are in trouble. Just as the alliance is solidified, a blue system notification screen begins to materialize right in front of Lloyd's face. The system alerts him that the orc tribe has fully opened up and accepted him as a true friend, rewarding him with a bonus of 100 RP. This sudden boost brings his current total of accumulated RP up to 611 points. Lloyd stands frozen for a moment, silently processing the incredibly generous system reward. Breaking his silence, Lloyd enthusiastically raises his fist and cheers along with the Steel Sand tribe. Following their successful mission, the group embarks on the long journey back and finally arrives at the Frontera estate. However, the peaceful citizens of the estate are instantly thrown into an absolute panic by what they see approaching. It turns out that Lloyd has marched a massive, imposing squad of 120 muscular orcs right into the middle of the village. Realizing the sheer terror his new allies are causing, Lloyd sweatily decides he needs to write an official letter to reassure the frightened locals. Up in the castle windows, even the Baron and his wife are trembling in sheer shock at the sight of the Green Army. Though the Baron knew the plan beforehand, seeing this massive force of orcs in person completely freezes him in place. To Lloyd's surprise, his reputation precedes him, and he receives an unexpected 300 bonus RP as stories of his noble courage spread. Lloyd happily accepts the points, bringing his total up to an impressive 911 RP. While the Baron handles selling the orcs' health goods to a wealthy merchant, Lloyd turns his attention to the magic tools left behind by Rufelin. Sitting on the floor amidst the pile of magical loot, Lloyd rummages through the items and picks up a strange glowing orange orb. While Javier asks if there's anything they can sell for quick cash, Lloyd explains he's looking for items they can utilize themselves first. As he flips through the pages of Rufelin's book, Lloyd's eyes suddenly widen in absolute shock at what he discovers. Without explaining, Lloyd bolts out of the room, yelling at Javier to organize the rest of the items while he runs off to the mine. Panting heavily, Lloyd sprints as fast as his legs can carry him toward the dark entrance of the mine. He bursts into the cavern, frantically shouting and searching for Towards. A weary-looking Towards, covered in dirt and holding a pickaxe, asks if he was being summoned, and Lloyd eagerly tells him that he has fantastic news. Panting for breath, Lloyd grabs Towards by the shoulder and asks if he remembers the exact terms of their contract. Specifically, the part about him working for 520 years. Lloyd lets out a nervous chuckle, admitting that the idea of a 520-year contract is completely absurd and practically a joke. Towards stares back in stunned silence, his exhausted face covered in dirt, as Lloyd cheerfully tells him he has absolutely nothing to worry about anymore. With a bright, sweating smile, Lloyd proudly presents an open book detailing a dark magic ritual on how to resurrect a corpse. Towards can only stare blankly, his soul seemingly leaving his body as he processes this terrifying new development. Lloyd ecstatically explains that with this resurrection method, Towards can easily fulfill the entire 520 years of hard labor even after he dies, asking if he's thrilled by the news. An awkward silence fills the wooden tunnel as Lloyd continues to laugh like a maniac, while Towards stands frozen like a statue. Lloyd's cheerful expression suddenly vanishes, replaced by a chilling glare as he demands to know why he's the only one celebrating, ordering Towards to smile. Terrified by his master's sudden shift in mood, Towards hesitates, his face pale with dread. Tears stream down Towards' face as he forces the most agonizing, tearful smile of his life to appease his terrifying boss. Satisfied with the forced smile, Lloyd winks and gives him a playful finger gun, telling him to cheer up. Lloyd skips happily down the wooden mine shaft, pumping his fist and shouting words of encouragement as he leaves the traumatized worker behind. A system notification pops up, revealing that the King of Hell is so impressed by Lloyd's sadistic personality that he's considering hiring him, which Lloyd quickly snaps back at in annoyance. Clutching his book, Lloyd happily hums to himself as he strolls away, completely ignoring the system's speechless reaction. The system window sweat drops, confirming that it was being entirely serious about the King of Hell's job offer. Meanwhile, back at the Grand Estate, the sun shines brightly over the elegant stone mansion. Lloyd struts down the polished corridors of the castle, planning to have a serious discussion with the Baron. He pushes open the heavy double doors to the study, only to find the room completely empty. A nearby maid informs Lloyd that the Baron is currently hosting guests in the reception room, sparking his curiosity about who could have arrived. The maid hesitatingly reveals that the visitors are none other than Mr. Shalo and his associate, Meatloaf. Lloyd stands frozen for a moment, silently processing the names of these unexpected and troublesome guests. In an instant, Lloyd's face twists into a monstrous, vein-popping grin of pure malice, horrifying the poor maid. Inside the reception room, a lavish chandelier hangs overhead as the guests explain their strict policy regarding single installment debt repayments. The wealthy loan sharks lounge comfortably across from the stressed baron, offering a seemingly generous deal to let him repay only 10% of the principal this time. The heavy-set merchant flashes a sly grin, revealing the catch. They want full ownership of the Frontera family's valuable mine. The baron remains silent in deep contemplation as the greedy merchants press him for an answer, questioning why he isn't thrilled about having his interest reduced. Just as the tension in the room peaks, Lloyd knocks on the door, asking to come in, which the startled baron quickly permits. Lloyd walks in with a bright, flowery smile, casually greeting everyone as if he doesn't have a care in the world. The greedy merchant immediately waives his official permit, warning Lloyd not to threaten them, but Lloyd just chuckles and praises their thoroughness. Clasping his hands cheerfully, Lloyd mentions he overheard their proposal and politely asks if he can offer his own suggestion. The merchant angrily rejects Lloyd's input, demanding they stick to their plan of paying the debt gradually while lowering the interest. Losing his temper, the merchant stands up and yells at Lloyd for daring to speak when he was told to shut up. Despite keeping a pleasant smile on his face, Lloyd bluntly points out the unfair double standard and admits that he is actually quite pissed off. Suddenly, a deep, menacing voice booms from the doorway, demanding to know who is responsible. A massive, muscular green foot steps heavily onto the wooden floor, signaling the arrival of a terrifying guest. A towering, muscular orc warrior steps into the room with a fiery aura, demanding to know who dared to anger his brother, Lloyd. The sudden appearance of the giant beast sends the two merchants into a state of absolute, screaming terror. The orc glares down at them, warning that anyone who makes Lloyd suffer will face total destruction by the Steel Sand tribe. Lloyd tries to play it cool, laughing off the anger, but the observant orc insists that Lloyd is clearly upset. While the merchants cower in fear on the sofa, Lloyd casually turns back to them to ask what they think of his suggestion. His smile grows wider as he ominously warns them of the consequences if they decide to reject his proposal. Lloyd claims that he will be the one getting hurt, while his face contorts into a terrifyingly unhinged expression. Taking Lloyd's words literally, the enraged orc vows to tear the merchants limb from limb if they dare to harm his brother. Terrified for their lives, the two greedy merchants bolt out of the mansion as fast as their legs can carry them. Back inside, Lloyd hands over the revised contract to his stunned father, noting that while erasing the debt entirely would be a crime, this new deal is the next best thing. He reassures his father that with the Ondal construction expanding and coal mining going smoothly, they will easily clear the debt in no time. Lloyd hands over the precious contract, advising the Baron to keep it safe, to which his father numbly agrees. However, the Baron's expression quickly shifts to deep concern as he mentions a massive, looming problem they still need to solve. The Baron explains that these giant orc allies possess massive appetites, consuming 10 times more food than ordinary humans. He admits that the food expenses are astronomical, and it would be a disaster for their operations if the orcs were to leave due to hunger. Despite the massive food crisis, there is no denying that the orcs have proven to be exceptionally skilled miners. The orcs throw themselves into their work, swinging their heavy pickaxes with relentless, sweaty determination. With a mighty roar, an orc slams his pickaxe down, completely shattering the hard stone before him. The frantic supervisor runs up to report that one of the orcs has been mining non-stop for 24 hours straight without a single break. The Lord orders his men to drag the protesting orc out of the mines, while the beast desperately cries out that resting will ruin his muscle gains. Their productivity is 10 times higher than anyone could have anticipated, fueled by boundless stamina and unimaginable physical strength. When asked about wages, the orcs are completely baffled, explaining that they have absolutely no need for human currency. This means they don't require any monthly wages, but there is still a massive catch to this arrangement. All they want in exchange is to be fed until they are completely full, patting their massive, rumbling bellies. While it sounds simple, satisfying their monstrous appetites presents a colossal financial challenge. To cover the food costs, the Lord grimly suggests that they will need to tremendously increase the taxes on their estate. He argues that using tax money to buy meat for the orcs is a guaranteed investment given their massive coal mine output, though his advisor remains hesitant. The advisor points out that the common folk simply cannot afford such a steep tax hike, making it impossible to collect more money. The Lord agrees that endlessly raising taxes is basically robbery, which would only hurt their overall revenue in the long run. When asked how they will generate the necessary tax revenue, the Lord reveals his simple solution. They must help the citizens earn more money first. His eyes turn toward the vast, abandoned wasteland located in the northern region of the estate. He plans to reclaim the treacherous Mara's wetland and transform it into highly fertile farmland. By giving this new land to the people, they can farm to their heart's content, earn a massive income, and easily pay higher taxes. As the sun sets, the Lord sets out to inspect the marshy terrain in person. A heavy boot splashes deep into the soggy, waterlogged mud of the swamp. His companion questions how anyone could possibly farm a land abandoned for hundreds of years, but the Lord confidently replies that he has a plan. However, looking at the sheer scale of the swamp, the Lord silently admits to himself that this will be an incredibly difficult task. Back at his workshop, he studies a miniature dirt model, realizing he needs to design a perfect drainage system for the rainwater. Lacking advanced technology, he is forced to run a manual, hands-on simulation by molding the wet clay himself. He repeatedly fails and messes up, struggling to balance the elevation as the water keeps overflowing in his model. But his sleepless night pays off, as morning breaks over a vision of beautifully structured, terraced green farmlands. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, Lloyd mumbles incoherently as he continues to meticulously shape his mud model with his bare hands. Watching from a distance, Javier asks how long this intense focus has lasted, only for the Baron to reveal it has already been 21 grueling days. Javier grows concerned over Lloyd's lack of food and sleep, suggesting they should step in to stop him, but the Baron immediately refuses. Looking at his son's muddy back as he carries a heavy bucket through the fields, the Baron reflects on how much he used to despair over whether Lloyd would ever change. But seeing Lloyd push himself to the absolute limit for the sake of the Terrorize people, the Baron realizes his son is fighting for a true miracle. Knowing he cannot directly assist with the engineering, the Baron resolves to at least stay out of his son's way and let him finish his work. Javier agrees with the decision, acknowledging that the young master is currently in a state of absolute, unshakable focus. With sheer determination written all over his face, Lloyd grits his teeth, refusing to break his promise or give up on his grand design. Suddenly, a system notification pops up, revealing that the Baron's respect has surged, earning Lloyd 20 relationship points and bringing his total to 931. As night falls over the quiet forest, the hooting of owls echoes through the dark trees. Kneeling before his completed, intricate mud model of the terrace drainage system, Lloyd stares down at his finished masterpiece. With his scarred and dirt-caked hand, he raises a triumphant fist toward the glowing full moon. He roars in absolute triumph under the moonlight, declaring that the water will finally drain perfectly through the sink. In his mind, a shower of sparkling gold coins rains down as he envisions the massive tax revenue he can collect once the drainage succeeds. Imagining himself bathing in sweet, golden honey, he celebrates the sheer wealth and comfort that this successful project will bring him. Standing completely alone in the silent, dark field, his loud, greedy celebration contrasts hilariously with the quiet night. Exhausted, he collapses flat on his back onto the dirt, letting out a long, weary sigh of relief. Looking up at the sky, he smiles, thinking that this grueling labor is nothing compared to his past life of endless overnight shifts and part-time jobs. Suddenly, a bright blue system window flashes directly over his face, catching him completely off guard. The system announces that his unique real-world experience has heavily influenced his design skill, unlocking a brand new option. Sitting up, Lloyd reads the details of his new simulation mode option, which allows him to manipulate and test measured data in real time. Instantly, his eyes glow with a green light as a virtual, three-dimensional grid map of the surrounding mountains materializes before him. Fascinated by the interface, he reaches out to pinch and adjust the peak of the virtual mountain grid. As he manipulates the simulation, the mountain peak crumbles and triggers a landslide, demonstrating the system's realistic physics. Furious that this convenient simulation tool was unlocked only after his manual labor, Lloyd screams at the system screen, which cheekily reminds him that he just said the work was bearable. The system explains that his skills can be enlightened with acquired wisdom, revealing that this entire situation is actually a result of his own wish. Confused by this revelation, a dusty Lloyd questions how being transported to this world could possibly be related to any wish of his, accusing the silent system of not actually knowing the truth. He reflects on his simple past desires, just wanting to graduate, get a license, land a stable job, and live without financial worries. However, the system counters by stating those were merely his superficial goals, whereas his true, intense wish is something that transcends both time and space. Dismissing the system's cryptic, philosophical talk, Lloyd sighs and cuts the conversation short, insisting that he is far too busy to waste time on existential debates. He immediately calls out to his loyal summons, Padong and Bell, who eagerly pop up on his shoulders with curious expressions. With a mischievous grin, Lloyd asks them if they are ready to meet a brand new friend, leaving both summons completely puzzled. As the sun begins to rise over the vast mountain range, casting a warm golden glow across the landscape, a new day of work begins. Standing before a massive, waterlogged wetland, Lloyd declares that draining this area is the crucial first step of their ambitious Mars project. He casually explains the monumental task ahead. They must scoop out every last drop of water from the wetland and dump it, sending his tiny summons into an absolute panic. As a terrified Padong squeaks in protest, Lloyd reassuringly smiles and agrees that such a massive chore is indeed completely impossible for just the two of them. To solve this labor shortage, Lloyd decides it is time to perform a summon draw right then and there. He resolves to spend every single point of his accumulated RP to summon as many fantasy species as possible to help with the project. Pulling up the random draw screen, he notes that while the initial draw costs 100 RP, the price will increase by 1.5 times with each subsequent attempt. Calculating his budget, he realizes he can afford exactly 4 draws, and immediately slams his finger onto the start button, hoping for raw power over special skills. As a massive, noisy summoning chant echoes through the air, Lloyd hopes to pull a large species similar to his current summons that can efficiently scoop water. The intricate green magic circle spins rapidly, emitting a brilliant flash of light as the summoning process begins in earnest. With a loud crackling sound, the magical energy surges forward, ready to manifest the newly drawn creature. But instead of a majestic summon appearing gracefully, a small object flies straight out of the portal and smacks Lloyd directly in the face with a painful thud. Stunned and bleeding slightly from his nose, Lloyd watches in silence as the round, yellow creature bounces harmlessly onto the dirt. The adorable, chubby yellow creature happily cries out its own name, introducing itself to its new master. Lloyd's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as the creature's name triggers a sudden, alarming realization in his mind. He internally panics, wondering if this tiny, round ball of a creature is actually supposed to be a legendary hippopotamus. Unbothered by Lloyd's shock, Padong and Bell cheerfully welcome their cute new companion with open arms. The little yellow hippo beams with joy, completely unaware of the massive expectations its new master has for its water-scooping abilities. The 3 adorable creatures immediately hit it off, dancing happily in a circle as they cheerfully call out each other's names. Lloyd politely interrupts their celebration, asking the little yellow hippo if it can show him its instruction manual. Without hesitation, the hippo spits out a crumpled, wet paper directly onto the ground, a messy delivery that Lloyd has unfortunately grown used to. Lloyd picks up the soggy, dripping document with a blank look of absolute disappointment, bracing himself for whatever is written inside. His frustration peaks as he reads that this creature won't grow any larger even if he feeds it sunflower seeds. Lloyd begins to worry that he might have completely failed his summon this time, while the oblivious hippo just beams up at him with pure joy. He crosses his arms in deep contemplation, staring down at the tiny creature and wondering what use it could possibly have. The little hippo continues to smile back warmly, completely unaware of its master's internal crisis. Hoping for a redo, Lloyd sighs and announces to the system that he wants to draw another fantasy species. The system quickly shuts him down, revealing he can only draw once a day, leaving Lloyd to curse his luck at what feels like a total waste of time. Seeing their new friend look so dejected, Belle angrily protests against Lloyd's harsh attitude, while Padong tries to comfort the sad little hippo. Lloyd defends himself, explaining that their workload is rapidly expanding and the hippo is simply too tiny to be of any real help. In response, the cute creatures instantly launch a full-blown labor strike, holding up tiny protest banners that actually manage to intimidate Lloyd. Giving in to the strike, Lloyd decides to ask the hippo directly what its skill is, wondering if it can at least dry his clothes. A system notification appears above the happy hippo, revealing its unique skill is called One Shot at level 1. Lloyd asks if One Shot means it can drink water all at once, and the little yellow hippo eagerly nods in confirmation. The hippo proudly pats its round belly, indicating it can drink up to 4 times its own stomach capacity. Lloyd reflects on how incredibly lucky he has been so far, always managing to summon creatures with the exact skills he needs for his projects. Eager to prove its worth, the hippo runs toward the nearby water as Lloyd tells it to go ahead and show us. The tiny hippo leans over the bank and begins to slurp up the water with quiet, steady gulps. As Lloyd and the others watch silently, the sound of the hippos drinking echoes across the bank. Suddenly, a look of confusion washes over Lloyd's face as he notices something bizarre happening. The water continues to rush into the tiny hippo's mouth at an alarmingly fast rate. Lloyd rubs his eyes in disbelief, wondering if his mind is playing tricks on him as the hippo's body visibly starts to expand. The small stream quickly turns into a rushing torrent, sucked directly into the expanding hippo as it drinks with terrifying power. Lloyd can only watch in deadpan silence as the loud, rhythmic gulping sounds of the drinking hippo echo through the air. He tilts his head back, his bewilderment growing by the second as the relentless swallowing sounds continue without pause. Looking up, Lloyd is absolutely dwarfed by the hippo, which has ballooned into a colossal, mountain-sized beast. With terrifying suction power, the giant creature creates a massive vortex, draining the surrounding water into its bottomless stomach. Having consumed the entire torrent, the bloated hippo squeals in pure delight, celebrating its successful feast. Lloyd stands frozen at the edge of the newly emptied basin, staring at the muddy ground that is now left with nothing but shallow puddles. His jaw drops in sheer disbelief, completely stunned by the absurd speed of the creature's drinking ability. He realizes with a shout of excitement that draining this massive wetland will now take them only a matter of days instead of months. Seeing the pink dragon and the hamster puffing their chests out proudly, Lloyd dryly questions why they are acting so smug when they didn't do any of the work. Turning his attention to his system interface, Lloyd politely asks the administrator if his incredible luck is truly random, since he always gets the exact skills he needs. The system screens respond, suggesting that to survive his terrible fate in this world, he must have unlocked a hidden ability to draw perfect luck. However, the system quickly adds a sarcastic remark about him picking his nose, prompting Lloyd to complain about the sudden disrespect. When the giant hippo happily signals that it can drink even more, Lloyd looks up in absolute amazement. With a confident smirk, Lloyd tells the creature to drink to its heart's content, fully prepared to exploit this incredible power. He proudly declares that the grand construction of the Mara's land will officially begin the very next day. The vast, muddy wetlands stretch out before them, ready to be transformed by Lloyd's ambitious engineering plans. The system interface announces that the project will commence using a highly efficient vertical drainage method. The local workers stand by with their jaws hanging open, completely terrified by the absurd scale of the operation. The plan is simple. The giant hippo will suck up the wetland water, spit it safely into the river, and shrink back to its cute, normal size. Next, the laborers get straight to work, clearing out the stubborn grass roots and plant debris from the damp soil. Javier unleashes his explosive sword aura, blasting deep holes into the compacted earth with ease. Bamboo poles are quickly inserted into the holes, while Padong rolls across the surface to firmly compact the sand stakes. As the water naturally filters and pools inside the bamboo pipes, the hippo steps in to suck it all up in a single massive gulp. Using his advanced simulation skills to guide the workers, Lloyd oversees the construction of a sturdy bank as 10 grueling days fly by. Finally, a brilliant green glow signals that the first major section of the drainage system has been successfully completed. Lloyd rallies the workers, shouting at the top of his lungs that they still have a long way to go before the project is truly finished. He hypes up the crowd by asking them what reward awaits them once all of their hard work is finally complete. He promises a massive bonus party, instantly igniting a wave of wild cheers and motivation among the fired-up workers. As the hot summer days roll on, even the local cicadas seem to feel the intense heat of the season. A shirtless and sweaty Xavier pauses with his shovel, looking out over the fields in silent disbelief. He marvels at how this once barren, abandoned wasteland is actually transforming into lush, organized farmland before his very eyes. However, he can't help but question his life choices, wondering how a proud knight like him ended up doing hard labor on a construction site. His existential crisis is cut short when Lloyd comes running across the fields, loudly calling out his name. Lloyd hands him a bag of seeds to plant, quickly shutting down Xavier's nightly protests by claiming it's a vital mission to drive out pests and protect the estate. Defeated by Lloyd's absurd logic, the powerful knight finds himself quietly squatting in the dirt, watering the soil. Xavier realizes he fell for Lloyd's silver tongue yet again, swearing to himself that he won't let the noble trick him next time. Even so, he has to admit that the swampy wetlands are genuinely turning into proper, fertile rice fields. He notices that the Baron and Baroness are also watching the transformation, likely sharing his absolute amazement. Looking over the vast, beautifully engineered landscape, it truly feels like nothing short of a miracle. The local farmers wipe the sweat from their brows, smiling with deep gratitude and relief at the incredible progress. They watch with immense respect as Lloyd strolls along the ridge, carrying his shovel like a true leader of the people. Suddenly, the system alerts Lloyd that the citizens' profound admiration has earned him a massive bonus of 450 reputation points. This massive boost brings his total current reputation points to a whopping 1,281. A smug, satisfied grin spreads across Lloyd's face as he realizes his hard work is paying off in more ways than one. As the days pass, dragonflies flutter through the clear blue sky, signaling the steady march of the seasons. Soon enough, vibrant green rice sprouts begin to push through the fertile mud, growing strong and healthy. Now back in his proper knightly attire, Xavier crouches down to inspect the thriving green crops with a silent gaze. Seeing the fruits of their hard labor, a rare, warm smile of genuine pride and satisfaction softens his face. Lloyd, lounging on the bank above, casually mentions that the entire system will finally be complete once they install a water wheel. He explains that the water wheel is crucial to drain the excess water during heavy rains, preventing their hard-earned fields from being completely submerged. Javier points out that a technician is still required to get the water wheel up and running, casting a bit of doubt on how quickly they can implement Lloyd's plan. Suddenly, the sound of approaching hooves catches their attention, prompting a confused reaction from Javier as they both turn to see who is coming. A large entourage of riders approaches, led by a stern-looking man in a purple jacket and an older gentleman riding a white horse. Confused by the sudden arrival of this massive group, Javier bluntly asks Lloyd what these people could possibly want. Lloyd recognizes the older man as Viscount Racona, a neighboring noble whose territory lies just north of the Mara's wetland. The horses halt with a loud neigh, kicking up dust right in front of Lloyd and Javier. The leading rider looks down from his horse and aggressively demands to know who is in charge of the ongoing construction. Javier tries to warn the rider to watch his tongue, but Lloyd casually steps forward with a smirk, introducing himself as the person in charge and asking why they've come. The rider barks back, asking if they are unaware that this entire area actually belongs to Viscount Racona. He commands them to pack up and leave the premises immediately, but his threats do absolutely nothing to intimidate the duo. This area is known as the Mara's wetland, a vast and neglected region. For hundreds of years, the swampy terrain was completely abandoned by humanity, left entirely untouched and useless. Officially, the northern portion falls under the jurisdiction of Viscount Lacona, while the southern part borders the Frontera barony. Seeing that the land has suddenly become fertile and valuable, the greedy Viscount has shown up out of nowhere to claim it all without doing any of the hard work. Lloyd realizes that the Viscount does indeed have a legitimate legal claim to the northern section of the wetland, meaning he could legally demand they hand it over. However, Lloyd's signature devious smirk begins to form as he realizes that legal technicalities can always be manipulated. Playing dumb, Lloyd asks if the Viscount is accusing them of illegally invading and developing his private territory. The rider smugly confirms this, stating that the king himself entrusted the rights of this land to the Viscount. Looking down on Lloyd's plain attire, the rider rudely tells him to shut his mouth, claiming this is a private conversation strictly meant for nobles. But the rider's smug attitude vanishes instantly as he realizes he might have just insulted someone of high status. The surrounding workers immediately tense up, grabbing their tools as the atmosphere grows incredibly hostile. Even the Viscount looks taken aback as the tension in the air suddenly spikes. With a polite bow, Lloyd formally introduces himself as the eldest son of the Frontera family, completely catching the visitors off guard. Unimpressed by Lloyd's reputation, the Viscount snidely dismisses him, demanding to speak directly with his father instead of a misbehaving heir. While Javier is deeply offended by the Viscount's sheer rudeness, Lloyd simply cleans his ear, completely unfazed by the insult. The Viscount continues to scream at Lloyd, demanding he call Baron Frontera immediately, but Lloyd simply replies that he heard him loud and clear. With a nonchalant flick of his finger, Lloyd casually remarks that he merely heard the annoying buzzing of a dung fly somewhere nearby. Utterly clueless, the Viscount looks around in a panic, frantically searching for the non-existent insect Lloyd mentioned. His subordinate quickly leans in to whisper that Lloyd is actually insulting him, sending the Viscount into a state of shocked realization. Ignoring the Viscount's outrage, Lloyd begins reciting the kingdom's land law, specifically Act Number 321 regarding the cultivation of wasteland. Despite the Viscount's furious protests, Lloyd continues to lay down the law, explaining Article 1's purpose regarding the ownership of long-neglected wastelands. The Viscount continues to shout over him, but Lloyd smoothly transitions to Article 2, defining unattended wasteland as land left without residence or cultivation for a century. Pointing out his hard-working labor force, Lloyd cites Article 3, which states that anyone meeting the requirements is recognized as the true owner of the cultivated land. Holding up a single finger, Lloyd explains the first condition. The developer must invest both funds and physical labor to reclaim the area. As the Viscount's expression begins to sour, Lloyd holds up more fingers, listing the second and third conditions regarding residential structures and long-term agriculture. Stepping forward with absolute confidence, Lloyd prepares to deliver the fourth and final condition of the law. He reaches down and firmly grabs hold of a green stalk growing from the soil. With a satisfying tug, Lloyd pulls up a fully grown onion, explaining that ownership is secured once harvestable crops are produced on the land. The Viscount is left completely speechless, his face twisting in sheer shock and fury at the sight of the fresh harvest. Even Javier is caught off guard, staring in quiet amazement at Lloyd's brilliant legal maneuver. Lloyd holds up a bag of seeds, cheerfully instructing his workers to plant them in order to keep any unwanted pests at bay. With a mockingly bright smile, Lloyd congratulates the Viscount on witnessing the first-ever harvest of the Mara's wetland, joking that he won't charge him for the show. The Viscount's mind races in sheer panic, realizing that Lloyd had anticipated every single detail and prepared everything well in advance. Grinning ear to ear, Lloyd extends his hand and offers the newly harvested onion to the stunned noble as a parting gift. Lloyd's playful expression suddenly shifts into a cold, calculating smirk as he prepares to drop his final blow. With a terrifyingly intense gaze, Lloyd politely but firmly demands that the Viscount and his men get off his family's territory. Trembling with absolute rage and humiliation, the Viscount can do nothing but grit his teeth in silence. Defeated and utterly outmatched, the Viscount and his cavalry are forced to turn their horses around and retreat in shame. Once they are gone, a curious Javier asks Lloyd how he was able to predict that these greedy nobles would show up today. Lloyd simply looks away, coolly stating that he has dealt with opportunistic trash trying to steal other people's hard work far too many times before. Just as Lloyd finishes his cool explanation, a loud, collective cheer echoes from across the fields, catching both him and Javier off guard. The local workers raise their pitchforks and farming tools high into the air, chanting praises and celebrating the young master for protecting their beloved land. Lloyd stands frozen in silence as the roaring cheers of hooray wash over him, leaving him completely speechless at their sudden adoration. Instead of basking in the glory, Lloyd's face twists into a comical panic as he screams at them to get back to work, desperately wondering how he'll pay their salaries if they keep slacking off. Soon, the seasons begin to shift, and a torrential downpour sweeps over the vast, newly structured agricultural fields. Muddy rainwater surges through the newly constructed stone drainage channels, putting Lloyd's engineering work to its ultimate test. Drenched to the bone, Lloyd squats by the edge of the fields, anxiously observing the water levels to ensure his drainage system holds up. As the heat of summer slowly fades away, autumn arrives, bringing with it the relentless seasonal rains. The massive wooden water wheels spin vigorously under the heavy downpour, successfully diverting the massive influx of water. Despite running countless simulations, Lloyd refuses to let his guard down, squatting under an umbrella held by Javier, as he insists on monitoring the site until the very end. Together, the master and knight wait out the storm on the stone embankment, determined to prove once and for all that the Mara's wetland has successfully transformed into fertile, usable land. Finally, the dark storm clouds begin to part, and brilliant rays of sunlight shine down, glistening off the freshly washed green leaves. The stone-paved pathways drain perfectly, completely free of any flooding or structural damage from the heavy storm. Looking out over the vast, perfectly drained plains, Lloyd and Javier witness the breathtaking success of their hard work under the clear blue sky. Suddenly, a series of blue system notifications appear, congratulating Lloyd on acquiring a monumental construction achievement for leaving a historic mark on the continent of Laurasia. The rewards continue to pour in as his measurement and designing skills both level up, unlocking powerful new intermediate abilities like land price judgment and simulation mode. Exhausted but deeply relieved, Lloyd slowly stands up, his body trembling slightly after hours of intense tension. To top it all off, his reputation points skyrocket to over 1,300 as his favorable impressions with his parents, Javier, and the local townspeople all receive a massive boost. With a satisfied, confident smirk, Lloyd declares that this phase is officially complete, and it is finally time to move on to the next step of his grand plan. Meanwhile, far away in the grand and opulent territory of Lacona Viscounty, news of Lloyd's success finally arrives. Upon hearing the shocking report, Viscount Lacona slams his desk in a furious rage, unable to believe that the land reclamation project was actually successful. His aide nervously explains the details of the agreement, noting that the residents are now legally bound to stay and cultivate the land in exchange for free protection. Gritting his teeth in pure envy, the Viscount realizes that the peasants will now work themselves to the bone to cultivate the land, all because it officially belongs to Lloyd. He envisions the Mara's wetland transformed into a literal gold mine, a highly lucrative paradise destined to generate endless wealth. Overwhelmed by intense jealousy and regret, the greedy Viscount clutches his stomach in agonizing pain, screaming that half of that golden land should have been his. Driven by pure greed, the Viscount refuses to let go of the fertile, gold-producing land without a fight. He immediately summons his executive to put a new scheme into motion. With a twisted, malicious expression, the Viscount commands him to bring in the workshop supervisor. A few days pass, shifting the focus to a grand estate where a strange situation begins to unfold. Lloyd wakes up in his bed, groaning in pain as an intense, throbbing headache strikes him out of nowhere. He wonders if his relentless work schedule has finally caught up to him, leaving him completely drained. Knowing he has critical plans to arrange, he forces himself to stand up while Xavier snoozes peacefully nearby. Lloyd tells Xavier to wake up because it's time to get to work, startling the sleeping knight. However, as Lloyd looks at his bodyguard, he notices something highly unusual about Xavier's appearance. Lloyd asks Xavier why his face looks so distorted, teasingly wondering if even a powerful knight can suffer from exhaustion. Xavier confesses that he has never felt like this before, admitting that his headache is unusually severe. As Lloyd feels another sharp throb in his own head, a sudden wave of suspicion washes over him. He stops in his tracks, realizing that two healthy people getting sudden, severe headaches at the same time is no coincidence. A terrible possibility crosses his mind, making his eyes widen in sheer disbelief. He looks out over the peaceful valley, knowing that a hidden danger might be spreading through the entire settlement. Investigating further, he hears from Miss Emily, who apologetically admits her head has been pounding since dawn. The local farmer, Mr. Olaf, reveals that it's not just him. His entire family is suffering from the exact same headache. Even the farm animals are affected, as young Mikhail reports that his cows have completely refused to drink water since yesterday. Walking through the town, Lloyd and Xavier piece the clues together. Everyone is sick, and the animals are actively avoiding the water. Lloyd concludes that the source of this widespread illness is undoubtedly connected to the local water supply. He recalls that his greatest advantage in this world is his knowledge of the original novel's plot. However, the recent beastly ant crisis taught him that there are hidden anomalies not mentioned in the original story. Anticipating that Viscount Lacona would try to interfere with the Mara's land, Lloyd had dug deep into the estate's secrets and uncovered a vital clue. He discovered that the Lacona family's primary source of wealth is a highly guarded, mysterious dyeing technique. This famous blue dye relies entirely on a specific ingredient known as the Ladona fruit, which holds a dark secret. Lloyd clenches his jaw in frustration, while Javier silently stands beside him, observing the tense situation. Deeply infuriated, Lloyd's expression contorts with rage at the shameless greed of their enemy. Meanwhile, high-stakes negotiations take place inside the grand walls of the estate. The Lord sits in utter disbelief, his face pale with anger at the outrageous demands just made. Sitting across from him, the arrogant noble condescendingly remarks that the terms are simple enough to grasp. He brazenly demands half of the reclaimed land of Mares in exchange for stopping the release of toxic wastewater. Gritting his teeth, the Lord angrily calls him out for openly blackmailing his territory. Without an ounce of shame, the corrupt Lord smirks and proudly admits that he is indeed blackmailing him. Enraged, the Lord slams his hands onto the table, threatening to bring a formal complaint straight to the royal court. Unfazed, the blackmailer nonchalantly tells him to go ahead, acknowledging that the court would likely rule in his favor. Leaning forward with a villainous grin, he reminds the Lord that a royal ruling will take at least 2 full years. He mockingly asks if the estate can survive 2 years of exorbitant court fees while their water supply remains poisoned. Trapped without an easy escape, the Lord grits his teeth in pure helplessness. Standing up from the couch, the smug noble condescendingly states he will wait for a wise decision. As he turns to leave, the Lord stands trembling, burdened by the immense pressure on his estate. The Lord fumes with rage, remembering how his son and people bled to cultivate every inch of this land. He vows that he will never hand over a single grain of dirt to such pathetic extorters. As the arrogant noble mockingly bows before opening the door to exit, the door is violently slammed inward right into his face, sending him reeling back in agony. Lloyd casually strolls into the room with Javier, completely ignoring the groaning noble on the floor. With a calm smile, Lloyd announces to his father that they need to discuss countermeasures against the parasitic neighbors who polluted their river. Clutching his bruised head, the furious noble explodes, shouting if Lloyd just dared to insult a nobleman like him. Lloyd puts on a look of utter shock, mockingly gasping that a disgusting parasite actually understands human language. Enraged beyond control, the noble's face turns beet red as he grits his teeth in sheer murderous rage. Unsheathing his sword, he roars that Lloyd Frontera has insulted his honor twice, challenging him to an immediate duel. Instead of an honorable sword duel, Lloyd unleashes an absolute barrage of shovel strikes, mercilessly pounding the arrogant noble into the ground. Overwhelmed by the brutal pummeling, the noble screams in agony, completely abandoning his pride and begging for mercy as he admits defeat. Tears streaming down his face, the battered noble desperately holds up his hand, begging Lloyd to stop beating him. Finally catching his breath, Lloyd casually announces that his anger has been satisfied while the noble lies in a fetal position, sobbing pathetically. However, Lloyd immediately raises his shovel back up, declaring he needs to give him one extra beating for disrespecting his father, the Baron. He relentlessly rains down another flurry of blows, leaving the noble wailing and sobbing uncontrollably like a helpless child. Watching his son beat down an enemy noble, the Baron cheers joyfully while Javier looks on in utter disbelief at the family's unhinged behavior. Meanwhile, news of the failed confrontation travels back to the rival lord's grand city. The cunning elder lord furiously scolds his beat-up subordinate for returning covered in swollen bruises instead of successfully threatening the Fronteras. But as he stares at his officer's battered face, a sinister idea suddenly pops into his mind. He praises the confused officer, realizing that coming back severely beaten is actually the perfect opportunity for them. Sitting at his desk, the elder lord devises a scheme to file an assault lawsuit against the Frontera family for recklessly beating a noble. He cackles evilly, calculating that a court conviction could suspend the Frontera estate's development rights for up to 4 full years. Back at the estate, Lloyd sports a terrifyingly evil grin, already predicting every single move his enemy is planning to make. He rallies his people from the top of the wall, shouting that the Frontera territory won't fall for such cheap judicial tricks. Looking down at his massive workforce of men and summoned goblins, Lloyd rallies them to defend their land, built with their own blood and sweat. Raising his shovel high into the air, he vows to protect their home from the enemy's ruthless greed at all costs. The entire crowd breaks into a roaring cheer, fired up and ready to follow young Master Lloyd into battle. To solve their immediate water shortage first, Lloyd draws up plans for a massive reservoir measuring 50 by 100 meters. He summons Hamong to activate its high-level skill, spouting an endless torrent of fresh water directly into the newly constructed basin. Javier points out that relying on summons will exhaust everyone quickly, and Lloyd agrees that this water storage is merely a temporary band-aid. With a confident smirk, Lloyd reveals his true master plan, building a permanent, full-scale water supply system. He intends to construct a massive aqueduct canal stretching all the way from the Capua River in the eastern mountains directly to their estate. Seeing the insane scale of the project, Javier warns that the construction effort and financial deficit will be astronomical. But Lloyd just chuckles slyly, leaving Javier completely baffled as he claims they will somehow make a massive profit off the construction itself. Lloyd boldly claims that they won't just make a profit, but 100 times more, marching off enthusiastically with a shovel on his shoulder. A few months pass as the massive construction project gets underway across the territory. Meanwhile, Viscount Lacona is seen sweating nervously in his study, biting his finger in sheer desperation. He panics uncontrollably, utterly bewildered as to how his plans failed and terrified of what to do next. His butler enters to report that Lloyd Frontera is requesting a meeting, but the enraged Viscount screams at him to kick Lloyd out. The butler nervously adds that Lloyd claimed he came specifically to help solve the Viscount's recent troubles. Already lounging comfortably inside the office, Lloyd mockingly greets the distressed nobleman with a smug, teasing smile. When the rattled Viscount asks what he wants, Lloyd smoothly reiterates that he is simply there to consult on his dire problems. Infuriated by his audacity, the Viscount angrily demands to know what kind of nonsense Lloyd is blabbering about. With an unervingly mischievous smirk, Lloyd urges the nobleman to drop the act and be completely honest with himself. Leaning forward on the couch, Lloyd prepares to drop his real proposal. He directly asks what the Viscount would do if Lloyd offered to save his rapidly failing dye workshop. The Viscount freezes in dead silence, rendered completely speechless by the unbelievable proposition. Gritting his teeth, the Viscount venomously asks if Lloyd was the culprit behind the destruction of his dye workshop. Lloyd maintains a sharp, villainous smirk as the accusation hangs heavily in the room. Dodging a direct answer, Lloyd casually leans back and reminisces about how long and grueling their construction journey was. He points out that because the Viscount selfishly drained the local water supply, Lloyd's team had to source water all the way from the Capua River. He snarkily adds that he only discovered the water was being intentionally wasted thanks to the friendly explanation in the Viscount's own newspaper article. He details how his workers tirelessly dug up the ground from the river to their estate, trimming and burying massive conduit pipes. Losing his temper, the Viscount slams his desk and yells at him to get to the point, but Lloyd nonchalantly tells him to calm down and keep listening. Lloyd continues his tale, describing how a massive canyon suddenly stood in the path of their water route. Dramatizing the setback, Lloyd mockingly sighs that there was absolutely no other way around the gigantic canyon. Thus, they had no choice but to construct an enormous Roman-style concrete aqueduct bridge directly across the valley. To gather limestone as raw material for the concrete, Javier was tasked with blasting apart nearby rock cliffs using his sword. He concludes with a sly smile, explaining that during the blasting, large amounts of limestone unintentionally fell into the riverbed at the bottom of the valley. Lloyd explains that as Javier blasted the cliffs apart, massive deposits of grand limestone were fully exposed along the river valley. Enraged by the explanation, the Viscount slams his hands down, screaming at Lloyd to explain what any of this has to do with his dye workshop. With a subtle smirk, Lloyd points out that the valley's water flows directly downstream straight toward his workshop. He casually drops the harsh truth. The dissolved limestone in the water mixed with the dye chemicals, ruining the fabric and turning it into a foul poop-colored mess. Fuming with rage, the noble slams the furniture and shouts that Lloyd has no fear of the law, threatening to file an immediate complaint with the noble court. Unfazed by the outburst, Lloyd coolly invites him to go right ahead. The Viscount freezes in shock as Lloyd sits back comfortably, completely unbothered by the legal threat. Lloyd smugly explains that court rulings take at least 2 years, asking the noble if he thinks anyone will even remember his brand after 2 years without production. Sweating profusely, the Viscount grits his teeth in pure fury as he realizes just how devious Lloyd really is. Satisfied that he has answered all his questions, Lloyd stands up from the sofa and prepares to leave, leaving the nobleman speechless. As Lloyd turns his back, the desperate Viscount screams after him, boasting about his powerful connections inside the royal palace. Screaming until his face turns red, the noble vows that he will force Lloyd to repay several times the financial losses he suffered. Without even bothering to look back, Lloyd simply gives a dismissive wave of his hand as he walks out. Later, as they walk along a peaceful country road, Javier admits to Lloyd that he fails to understand his logic behind provoking the Viscount. Javier points out that goading the noble only made him angrier and more determined to fight a drawn-out legal battle. He warns that the noble's capital connections could drain their funds in court, but Lloyd nonchalantly brushes off his concerns. Lloyd simply tells Javier to wait a little bit and watch how things play out. With a sly grin, Lloyd adds that time will tell who truly suffers the bigger loss in the end. Days pass quietly over the scenic valley, while the noble's dye operations grind to a complete halt. 1 month later, the story shifts back to the estate grounds. The once proud Viscount is now flat on the floor, prostrating himself and desperately begging Lloyd to save his ruined workshop. Sitting relaxed in his armchair while Javier looks on in disbelief, Lloyd stares down at the thoroughly broken nobleman. Looking down on him smugly, Lloyd mockingly asks if his wealthy palace connections told him he had no chance of winning. He reminds him that proving intentional sabotage would be impossible for him, guaranteeing his complete defeat in court. Trembling on the carpet, the completely humbled Viscount admits his carelessness and sincerely begs for Lloyd's forgiveness. Resting comfortably in his seat, Lloyd coldly replies that mere spoken words and verbal apologies hold zero interest for him. Horrified, the Viscount desperately cries out that he has thrown away all his noble pride to plead on his knees, begging for mercy. Lloyd scoffs mockingly at the concept of pride, asking if a nobleman's dignity is even worth a fraction of a gold coin. Hearing Lloyd brag that he would gladly sell his own pride 10,000 times over for profit, the Viscount collapses in utter despair. Declaring that an apology is useless to him, Lloyd reaches into his jacket to pull out an official document. Flashing a bright smile, Lloyd hands over the water supply conditions contract and casually instructs the nobleman to sign. While Lloyd promises the workshop will be built in a week, the anxious Viscount rapidly flips through the thick stack of contract pages. Upon reading the actual fine print hidden inside the contract, the Viscount's face turns completely pale with horror. Enraged, The Viscount screams about the insane prices and questions charging for water, while Lloyd feigns total innocence, his expression instantly twisting into an intense stare. Lloyd ominously reminds him who originally claimed water wasn't free. With terrifying, wide eyes, Lloyd glares directly at the panicked nobleman, turning his own words against him. Trembling uncontrollably in sheer terror, the defeated Viscount realizes he has no choice but to submit to the ruthless deal. Back at the estate, the Baron stares at the contract in shock, bewildered by the massive monthly revenue detailed inside. As Lloyd cheerfully confirms the Viscount signed it himself, his father realizes this income will easily cover all their debts. The naive Baron joyfully claps his hands in gratitude, while Javier stands in the background in awkward silence. Javier reflects internally that the Viscount provoked the conflict first and that the outcome ultimately saved the estate. However, observing Lloyd's wickedly sadistic smile, Javier thinks to himself that Lloyd looks far more like a devil. He continues to analyze the horrifying hidden terms buried deep within the contract. Javier realizes the contract lacks an end date, binding the Viscount like a prisoner in chains to be drained until his death. Worse yet, the demonic terms pass the debt down forever, trapping the Viscount's descendants generation after generation. Exuding a menacing red aura, Lloyd sits triumphantly like a demon king who has crafted an eternal trap. With a predatory grin, Lloyd revels in his plan to squeeze every single drop of wealth out of the Viscount's domain. Interrupting his dark thoughts, the Baron suddenly speaks up to mention that he has more good news to share. Terrified by Lloyd's lingering demonic face, the Baron backs away nervously until Lloyd quickly laughs it off. Massaging his face back into a gentle expression, Lloyd is startled to learn they own valuable ancient treasures gifted by the Orc tribe. Javier breaks the news that Count Cremo sent a formal letter offering to buy their ancient treasures at a surprisingly high price. Lloyd gives a deadpan, skeptical glare, immediately suspecting there must be a catch behind such a generous offer. Javier points out that with that much gold, the Count could easily buy brand new treasures, leaving the Baron admitted he knows little beyond the offer itself. As the Baron mentions Count Cremo wanting the items to build a bronze statue, the view shifts to the grand port city known as Trade City Cremo. Inside a luxurious estate overlooking the harbor, an imposing figure stands with his hands behind his back, staring out the window. The reflection in the window pane reveals the stern, battle-scarred countenance of Count Cremo himself. Out in the open waters beneath a bright full moon, the quiet sea suddenly grows unsettled. A massive, ominous bulge rises from the ocean floor, breaking the calm surface of the water. Count Cremo narrows his intense eyes, silently observing the deep-sea disturbance. Without warning, a colossal geyser of seawater blasts hundreds of feet into the night sky. A terrifying red sea dragon erupts from the foam, unleashing a deafening roar with its razor-sharp maw. Count Cremo watches the massive beast rise from the waves with a cold, sweat-beaded expression. The monstrous crustacean beast towers over the ocean spray under the moonlight, radiating immense power. This catastrophic beast surfacing off the coast is officially revealed as the dread monster, Giga Titan. Meanwhile, back at the estate, word arrives that reconstruction in Lacona's capital is nearly finished, setting their departure for 1 week away. While pruning plants in the garden, the Baron listens as Javier explains that Lloyd intends to bring only 10 companions to cut travel expenses. The Baron quietly continues snipping at the branches, lost in his own deep thoughts. Javier gazes down at his lord silently, sensing the worry weighing heavily on his mind. To ease his master's burden, Javier assures the Baron that he will personally protect Sir Lloyd throughout the trip. The Baron confides that an envoy from Viscount Lacona recently tried to intimidate them into giving up half of Marez's reclaimed land. He admits that his past self would have cowered and surrendered, but witnessing Lloyd and the people's hard work gave him the bravery to resist. When the Baron laments his own perceived indecisiveness and weakness, Javier immediately speaks up to defend him. In a brief memory, Javier recalls how the Baron selflessly took him in when he was just a shivering, abandoned child freezing in the snow. The Baron offers a gentle, warm smile, acknowledging the compliment while humbly stating that kindness alone does not make a great lord. He solemnly notes that true leadership demands unwavering conviction and the decisive strength to take action. The Baron looks down with a gentle smile, noting that Lloyd is demonstrating that exact type of decisive leadership right now. Javier remains completely silent, a drop of cold sweat rolling down his cheek as he hears his lord's generous assessment. In reality, Javier knows Lloyd's true motivation isn't noble conviction at all, but rather an unhinged obsession with piling up gold and riches. Still, he decides to keep his thoughts to himself, rationalizing that money-driven conviction isn't necessarily terrible if it yields results. Turning around, the Baron abruptly informs Javier that his duty to secretly monitor Lloyd is officially coming to an end. Instead, he formally assigns Javier to serve as the personal escort and protector for Lloyd, the heir to the Frontera territory. Javier listens in speechless astonishment as the weight of this new assignment settles over him. Placing a hand over his heart in a respectful knightly salute, Javier promises to faithfully carry out his lord's orders. He mentally acknowledges that Lloyd has brought a miraculous revival to the impoverished estate, but a deep conflict lingers. No matter how much the estate prospers, Javier feels in his soul that he can never bring himself to like a person like Lloyd. His thoughts drift back to his early childhood, when the Baron knelt before him to ask what he hoped to become in the future. As a young orphan, Javier blushed in silence, unsure of how to articulate the boundless gratitude in his heart. With sudden resolve, the young boy boldly declared his desire to become a knight dedicated solely to protecting the Baron. The Baron laughed heartily and gave him an affectionate pat on the head, deeply moved by the boy's sincere devotion. He encouragingly told Javier that a child who survived the freezing winter on his own was destined to become the strongest knight in the world. To commemorate the promise, the Baron hand-carved a small wooden sword and presented it to young Javier as a precious gift. However, when the young Lloyd saw the gift, he cruelly ridiculed Javier's dream, mocking him as a pathetic loser. Screaming harsh insults, the arrogant young noble threw the carved wooden sword to the stone steps. With a violent stomp, Lloyd snapped the cherished wooden sword in two, shattering the boy's treasured gift. Back in the present, Javier puts on his heavy coat and prepares to head out, the painful memory still burning inside him. His expression darkens with cold determination as he glances toward the wall of his room. Looking at the broken wooden sword mounted proudly on his wall, Javier reaffirms his resolve never to like the master he serves. Moments later, Lloyd greets him with an overly theatrical customer service voice, welcoming him back for his bedtime lullaby. Lloyd smugly boasts that Javier is addicted to his bedtime routine, but Javier nonchalantly tells him to drop the chatter and get started. With an air of supreme confidence, Lloyd raises his finger and begins chanting tedious engineering formulas to put his knight to sleep. As Lloyd's monotonous math chanting fills the room, Javier tightly hugs his pillow, mentally wrestling with the disturbing realization that despite wanting to despise Lloyd, he keeps remembering the moments Lloyd worked tirelessly, contrasting with his usual sly, scheming nature. He remembers seeing Lloyd drenched in sweat, digging alongside the workers without complaining, forcing Javier to view his chaotic master in a completely different light. Lloyd snaps his fingers with a confident grin, uttering his signature hypnotic phrase to lock in the sleep command. Instantly, Javier's eyelids grow heavy, and he slumps back into the armchair, fast asleep. Javier's final internal thought before drifting off is sheer frustration at himself for briefly believing Lloyd was actually a decent human being. Outside, a bright full moon hangs in the quiet night sky above the estate building. Inside, both Lloyd and Javier are fast asleep, completely unaware of the approaching danger. Suddenly, a hooded assassin quietly slips through the open window, clutching a lethal blade under the moonlight. His eyes burning with hatred, the assassin mutters Lloyd's name through gritted teeth, ready to strike. Veins bulging on his face, he grits his teeth, blaming Lloyd for ruining his life. With a ferocious leap, the killer lunges down from above, raising his sword to impale the defenseless Lloyd in his sleep. He screams out his intent to kill with absolute hatred. The sharp blade arcs downward in a lethal motion aimed right for Lloyd's head. But in a flash of lightning-fast instinct, Javier reactively leaps up, tossing his pillow aside and unsheathing his sword. Sparks fly as Javier deflects the killer's blade mid-air, positioning himself perfectly as a human shield over Lloyd. The assassin is violently slammed down to the ground by the force of Javier's counter. Meanwhile, Lloyd remains completely asleep, snoring peacefully without a single care in the world. Javier instantly pins the intruder to the floor, causing Lloyd to finally groggily sit up, confused by the commotion. The next day, construction on the massive aqueduct project continues smoothly across the vast valley. At the dig site, Lloyd leads the workers in his daily safety chant, ensuring everyone stays disciplined while assembling the massive bamboo pipes. Javier approaches Lloyd with a report, confirming he sent the captured assassin's information directly to Viscount Lacona, to which Lloyd casually praises him. Javier explains that the assassin was likely a former employee fired by Viscount Lacona after the Viscount suffered financial losses from Lloyd's water tax scheme. Lloyd just shrugs nonchalantly, admitting he would have fired the guy too since paying high salaries while losing money to a rival makes zero business sense. Lloyd nonchalantly explains that petty people like the assassin always target others to vent their resentment, admitting he knew something like this might happen eventually when asked by Javier. Javier gazes sharply at him, calling Lloyd completely complacent for anticipating potential danger yet failing to prepare any defense for it. Lloyd pauses in silence, looking over at his knight with a blank expression. Turning around, Lloyd casually asks Javier what on earth he is talking about. Holding his shovel high, Lloyd boldly declares that he didn't need to prepare anything when he has Javier standing right beside him. Javier stands quietly from behind as Lloyd proudly presents his hilarious yet unbreakable logic. Shocked by this unexpected declaration of total reliance, Javier's eyes widen as a radiant light seems to gleam behind him. Pointing back with a smug grin, Lloyd praises Javier's immense competence and reliability. Lloyd brings up Javier's tragic past, reminding him how he survived alone as a 5-year-old child through a harsh winter after monsters destroyed his town. With a rare, warm smile, Lloyd adds that a survivor of such monstrous strength grew up to become the knight protecting his side. Looking straight at him, Lloyd asks who could possibly be more trustworthy than a man who conquered such hardship. Touched to his core, Javier stares ahead with soft, glistening eyes, visibly moved by Lloyd's absolute faith in him. An awkward silence falls over the area as the two men stand facing each other in complete quiet. Unable to handle the emotional tension, Lloyd suddenly flails in embarrassment, cringing and shouting at Javier to say something before he dies of cringe. Javier stands frozen with a sweat drop on his cheek, thoroughly speechless at Lloyd's instant mood shift. With his typical deadpan face, Javier dryly utters a single word of utter disbelief. Deep down inside, Javier instantly begins to hate himself for what he is thinking. As Lloyd bursts out laughing and pats Javier's shoulder, Javier internally scolds himself for briefly believing Lloyd was actually a decent person. Suddenly, system windows pop up declaring that Javier has relieved a long-held resentment in his heart, earning Lloyd relationship points and interest boosts. The system notification confirms that Lloyd's total reward points have now skyrocketed to 1,675. Looking down at the massive green pipeline being laid across the dirt, Lloyd estimates that construction will be finished by tomorrow. With a scheming grin spreading across his face, Lloyd announces that their next destination will be Cremo without delay. Clutching his shovel tightly, Lloyd's eyes light up with unbridled greed as he looks forward to making a massive pile of money.